Hard work will not make you rich. I get driven nuts by the amount of gurus and influencers and whatever who want to brag and say, no one can outwork me, I'm the best in the world. So many people outwork me. I still make more money than them. There has to be something else. One of the things that grinds my gears about a lot of the people that I see on Instagram that you probably see too is this whole like, no one can outwork me mantra. First off, it's objectively false because many people A, outwork you today, B, outwork you in the past, C, you haven't met everyone, and D, it doesn't fucking matter anyways. It's the same thing when someone's like, I'm the best, and you have to say you're the best because if you don't think you're the best, it shows that you're not confident. To me, I don't take that at all. If someone's like, I'm the best, then why aren't you on billboards? That's what the best would look like. Absolutely, you need to do the work. You need to put volume in, it's the only way you get better. But if you start claiming that you are the best, you cannot be outworked. You are making statements that you know are not true. Why are we bragging about work? Because work has very little to do with the highest levels of the game. Warren Buffett talks about if he makes 2 good decisions a year, he's had a good year. And so how is it that one of the best investors, one of the best business people in terms of measuring it by money, which is how you measure business, talks about how he does basically nothing, reads 5 or 6 hours a day, eats McDonald's, and makes a couple good decisions a year. How is it that that guy is making so much more money than the people who are bragging about the fact that they work so hard?
Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 with Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because in my first business, I was making $300 a month. I quit on my business partner, and the thing that saved me was studying the stories of super successful entrepreneurs. So I hope that this story today helps give you the motivation you need because I still need it too myself.
So today, let's learn from one of the best, Alex Hormozi, and my take on his top 10 rules of success. Enjoy.
Everyone only has the same hours of the day. Anybody who only sleeps 8 hours or only sleeps 7 hours and works the remaining of hours of the day, all of them would be tied for hardest working. So what creates output? You have volume of activity, and then you have the leverage of the activity that you're doing. That's what creates the total output. In order to do anything, you must do something. There has to be some level of energy that gets input into the system. Our activity, in terms of number of activities, is a very newbie measure of success in the beginning. Warren Buffett doesn't say, I sent 1,000 emails today. He doesn't talk like that. He's playing a different game. Jeff Bezos isn't like, woke up at 4 a.m. today. Now, mind you, I'm saying this as somebody who likes waking up early. We can't be as superstitious about what matters. Waking up early doesn't matter. Going to bed late doesn't matter. Not sleeping a lot doesn't matter. The few things that matter are the inputs that go into the system that have the most leverage to create the most output. Now, if you're a newbie and you can't get your ass off the couch, then by all means, figure out how to actually get your ass off the couch and do stuff. But then there's only so many hours, and so boom, and then very quickly you hit your capacity of work. Great, you've maximized that. Now what? The leverage that we have on that activity is gonna dictate how much we get out of it. And if we do a low leverage activity many times, we might get more than a high leverage activity that gets done once. A CEO who's gonna work with acquisition.com works virtually every hour of every day when they come in. Almost everybody does. So sometimes they ask, they're like, am I gonna be working more? Or like, it's impossible for you to work more. But you are gonna be changing what you work on because that's the only lever we have. There's only 24 hours. So we're gonna switch these 9 out and we're gonna plop these in with higher leverage activities. And so the way that we do that is we look at their calendars and we look at their org chart. This is how you grow a business. You look at what they spend their time on and you see which of these activities are low leverage. Is there anyone else in this org chart that we can hand these activities to? And if a large percentage of these activities are a certain type of thing and they don't exist in the org chart, then it's a role that we need to hire. The point of why I hate the concept of no one can outwork me is that there are many ways to win the game. If you were to think about an amazing goal as a dragon to be slain, if you are familiar with video games in any way, when you create like a war party, you have a group of people that are gonna go on a quest. You don't just have 10 paladins or guys who just have shields and swords. So you've got a healer, a mage that's really good at damage but can't take a lot of damage. Then you've got a paladin who can't hit as hard, but he can take a lot of shots. You find people who have complementary skills. If you're playing football, you don't have 10 running backs. The entrepreneur really should be the coach of the team. It's about organizing the pieces and how well they play together that ultimately determines how good the team is. Like how many times have you seen the team with the all-star that has the poor supporting cast get beat by the overall better team? It happens all the time. A lot of entrepreneurs, as I see them, are trying to play the game like they're the star player and they want to score all the points, but they lose to Apple because Apple's got a team. We celebrate a specific action like work when it's really just saying, oh look, there's a paladin who can take a lot of hits. Cool. That's not the only thing that's required to win. I think what is more valuable is to know what are each of the roles that exist within the business, A. B, is there one of these that you map to based on your characteristics and skill sets? And then C, what is my eventual evolution through entrepreneurship? We'll start at the beginning, which is what are the players on the field? So if you think about it by function, you've got somebody who has to promote, who's got to be a good marketer. They have to understand how to make things known across different platforms. Telling stories, building a brand, providing value to an audience. That's what marketing is. Sales is being able to convert that raw attention into a sale. Direct response ads, sales pages, video sales letters, etc., which is pretty much anything that's physical products or software based that's low ticket, or it's higher ticket, people to people, hand to hand combat who know how to in the beginning sell and then later train how to sell and then later lead people who train how to sell. These are not necessarily the same people. I've met really brilliant marketers who suck at sales and really good salespeople who suck at marketing. Then you've got somebody who understands product. How do we make something beautiful? The guy who started Shopify, he's not CEO of Shopify. He's head of product. He's a mage. He knows how to cast spells. And then you've got the experienced people who are managing everything outside of the actual product itself. How do customers engage with us? How can we provide more value? How can we give them an amazing experience? How do we make sure they're hitting these milestones? This person who knows customer experience and customer success is not the same person who understands product and UX and design. That's a different game, which is different than the guy who knows how to close, who's different than the guy that knows how to promote. The bigger the enterprise gets, the more specialized the skill becomes and the deeper the well of experience that people need to be. They have to be more specialized. When people are like, I can't be outworked, you're bragging about the wrong thing. It should be like, I can't be out-recruited. I can't be out-managed. No one can build a culture like me. That's super high leverage across the organization. No one can lead like me, but no one can outwork me. It's just an irrelevant activity metric. I love working. I work all the time, but I would never claim that no one works harder than me. I tend to have very good leverage with the activities that I do. I spend tons of time writing a book, and that book prints and sells copies forever. It's a different way to play the game. And so level 2 of this, which player you are. In the middle run of this, you end up segregating yourself to a portion of the business that you're an expert at or that you're best at. CMO or chief sales officer, chief product officer. It's not about one player being the champion here. It's about how the team works together, which then gets to the third level of this. It's just about being the coach. Think about what the best coaches do. They're literally trying to headhunt the best players and they're trying to recruit the best people from college. Look at what Google does. Think about their recruiting efforts. They have huge influxes dedicated to getting the best and smartest people out of college. And they have another ring for the best and smartest people coming out of business school. And then another one is their very high level recruiting at the top of the executive level. The parallels between sports and business, they are almost the same in that way. Now, mind you, you can only have 10 or 11 people on the field. You might have 10,000, but if each of those players represents a function or department of the business, it makes more sense. When we move up the levels of entrepreneurship, we need to make sure that we're playing the right game and that we're using the right metric to measure our success. Final level of this is being the coach, is recruiting the top level executives and creating a farm system underneath to feed into the company that you have so that you can have a sustained competitive advantage and create a dynasty for the team so you can create the best winning team every year and have the soft skills of creating a culture of high performance so that you get the most out of every individual player. And the difference between amazing coaching and mediocre or poor coaching is what would players do if they had no coach or leader? And then what would they do if they had the best coach and best leader? The delta between those two is the value of the coach, the value of the CEO. The CEO needs to have the highest return on time out of anyone in the organization because they need to always be solving the next problem. As long as when they replace their time, the activities they do with the new stuff builds the business even more, then that trade will always work. And if CEO can come in and turn a business around, even behemoths around, in 2-3 years, based on the standard they set and the values that they stand for, that delta across the entire organization is your greatest leverage.
Rule number 2 is choose friends carefully.
I have shed friends every season of my life. My close circle has always been very, very small. Very, very small. Very, very small. Very small. Non-existent. I also feel like I grow really quickly because I don't hold on to things long. The moment something doesn't provide me value, I shed it. I think about my life in 3 to 5 year seasons. First, I was a high school womanizer for the most part, and then I was also like really deeply angry. I had high school friends that when I left high school, I basically stopped being in contact with them. And then I had my come to Jesus where my dad was like, you suck as a human, you have a terrible reputation, maybe you should stop being who you are. Cleaned up my act, I stopped drinking nearly as much as I was. I started going to school and studying 12 hours a day, president of the fraternity, and that was my college season. And I had college friends. And then when I left college, I pretty much stopped being in contact contact with anyone that I went to college with. Most people suck at most things and aren't bound for greatness because of who they are and the choices that they're willing to make. The stories about friends leaving the hometown and no longer remembering where they're from is one that is told by society because society is the majority. The majority of people get left behind. If you look at the things that you want to get in life, there's a price for them. You don't buy everything you see in the mall. Why not? Because you don't want to pay the price. Just because you might think that a shirt or jacket is cool, just because you think an outcome is awesome, you might not be willing to make the trade. Winners and losers have the same goals. The goal doesn't make you unique, it's the willingness to pay the price that makes you unique. Because I'm like, everyone wants to be rich. One of the reasons that I cut people out sooner than most is because I do not like the labels that they speak over me. One of the big things with identity is the labels that we say about ourselves. I am X, I am impatient, I am angry, I am whatever, right? I am poor, I don't even like saying it. People in your past have the identity that they know you as, and then they will speak and they will beat that label into you because you're not matching their pattern. Why have you changed? You are X, you are Y, and you're trying to not be that because you're doing something different than changing, you're growing. But they see it as change. And that's why the best response in the world to someone who says, hey, you've changed, is to say, yeah, you haven't. The amount you like or love someone is directly proportional to what you're willing to give up to maintain the relationship. For example, if there's a piece of car, right, and you work on it all the time, you might say, that guy must really love it because of how much time he puts into that thing. This guy must really love his country because he's willing to give his life for it. What are you willing to give in exchange to maintain the relationship? If you're not willing to give up basically anything to maintain the relationship, then how much do you love them? I think it's been a very helpful filter for me to say, not do I love my friends, but which friends do I love the most? Which friends am I willing to sacrifice the most to keep the relationship? And I am a big believer in utility. There is an exchange in every relationship. You get something and they get something back. People don't like the idea that relationships are transactional, but they are. Transactional just has a commercial vibe to it. But if we just think about it as from a behavior standpoint, you've got two things that can happen. A behavior is reinforced or it is punished. That's it. When you have exchanges, quite literally, with people, those exchanges are either reinforced or they're punished. Part of the strength of the relationship is how long you're willing to wait for the next time that relationship is reinforced. If you have a long history of positive experiences with a person, you're willing to wait a longer period of time if they're going through a breakup, they're having a hard time, to keep the relationship going. But at some point, even if you've been friends with somebody for 10 years, if there's just not any positive reinforcement, at some point, you do cut it off. The people who we're surrounded with when we grow up, it's very unlikely, just from a population standpoint, that they're going to be great. Statistically, that they're going to be the top 1% or 0.1% is unlikely. So it would make sense that you change your friends over time. Why do people get so weird about keeping relationships that don't serve them? I think it's just because we have a societal story around it, that you're a bad friend. But I could also think of me being as a good friend to my next friend that I just made room for. There's gonna be a friend who's gonna move in to my spot on my buddy's calendar, who does wanna do fantasy football, who does wanna drink with him on Sundays, so it's not this like, all right, I'll go to the game with you, but I'm not drinking. Oh, dude, you're not gonna, come on, man. Because the other guy's like, yeah, shots all around. And they're gonna have a blast. They would better be served with people who want the same things as them. Just because I'm not seeing them anymore doesn't mean that I don't wish them well. But if someone only tells you the stories of when you got f***ed up and why you did that stupid thing, they're encouraging you and retelling you the story of who you used to be. And you want people around you who don't believe the lies you used to tell about yourself. The character trait shift is not a binary. It's how patient are you? How kind are you? How loyal are you? How honest are you? And so you want people who encourage you in the behaviors that you want to be like. And this is why like shedding identities is such a core part of entrepreneurship, is that you have to be willing to say, I am no longer this way. I will no longer behave in this way. And I don't accept that reality as truth. Many of the people I had around me, A, weren't willing to pay the price that I was willing to pay for the things that I wanted, but also wanted me to give them more than I was willing to. And so I'll give you a story that will paint me in a bad light, and that's fine. There was a teacher that I grew up with in high school, and he's the one who stayed with me after school for a year and worked out with me. 2 hours a day, and he taught me how to work out. I got in shape, got more confidence, better at school. From there, that snowballed into me getting into fitness. Huge catalyst snowball. Somebody heard that story and then found the teacher, and they linked us. He was like, hey man, I'm not asking for a lot. I would love to just have like a 2-hour call with you every week. I was like, a 2-hour call every week? I was like, I don't even talk to my mother that much. I don't talk to anybody that much. I talk to my wife, that's it. The value of the relationship was in the past. You may be like, Alex, you're a horrible person. And that's possible. Maybe I am. I was not willing to give 2 hours a week, 100 hours a year for the rest of my life to pay a debt for somebody who worked out with me. Because we only have so much juju, we only have so much time, we only have so much focus, so much energy that we can pour into things. And if you're not putting all your energy in one direction, it's scattered and then you don't move as fast. My closest friend, I spend 1 hour a week with every week. My closest friend, like clockwork. It's my highest priority meeting. It is something that brings me joy. And we get lots of exchange with one another. He's the one who helps me write my books, Dr. Kashi.
Dr. Kashi here.
I get a lot from that. Now, if I didn't get anything from that, over time, slow down the communication between us. I would make it every other week, once a month. If you slow down your communication cadence with someone, how frequently you see them and when you accept invitations, it naturally fizzles. But if it gets to a point where if someone's like so close that it would be obvious and a conversation needs to be had, I encourage you to just have it. You want to be a kind person. And the way you are kind is that you tell the truth. And you just be honest. And the easiest way that I can tell you to be honest is, when you talk about somebody behind their back, just say it to them. It's like, yeah, Sandra's been like all over the place lately. And she's like, I don't know, drinking a little bit too much. Sandra, you've been all over the place lately. You've been drinking a little bit too much. I'm just not sure if I want to associate with that right now. People just don't have the balls to do that. But if you do that, I promise you, you'll either have better relationships or you'll be done with this Mickey Mouse bullshit of not even being in a real relationship and not wanting to confront reality. Because you may have a shot at getting them to realize that they're not on the path that they wanted to be on. Because you were friends with them at some point. And so either your goals have changed or theirs have. If you listen to Kobe's interviews where he talks about his friends, he says very explicitly that he's willing to put everything on the altar for his dream. Now, some people make the argument that that's not, quote, healthy. The question that we're answering here is not how do we do healthy stuff? The question is how do we become the greatest? People will judge you on how you spend time, and their judgments are simply expressions that they would not spend their time the same way you do. Hey, you work a lot. And I could say, hey, you don't. To the same degree, it's like, you spend so much time with your kids. Right? If I say it like that, people are like, wait, no, I'm supposed to. It's only the supposed to that's the thing that gives all the emotional charge to these conversations. Otherwise, it's just observing reality. You can't expect to do the same thing everyone else is doing and then somehow achieve a different outcome. Once you have the vacuum of friends, because you'll probably have weeded people out, then the best thing to do is join communities. And then you'll make friends with people in those communities who have the same goals as you. And then if you crush it, because you understand that volume is the answer and time is the ingredient, you're going to rise in that community and you'll gain more status and you'll start hanging out with the people who are at the top of that community, and then you can leapfrog into other communities. It's just lunch tables on steroids. I've wanted to live a rare life, and so I will have to be surrounded by rare people, and rare people are by definition rare. They're not common. My hope is that the people that I meet now are trying to go all the way with me. I want to do epic shit. If I die and don't do epic shit, I will be bummed. How much am I willing to endure or sacrifice in order to maintain that relationship that I have with my dream? If I have many, many friends over different seasons, I'm totally cool with that. Thank you for that season. It was awesome. I don't believe things need to be forever to be good. And it's only the romantic story that we were told of friends for life, etc. If you die with one good friend or two good friends, like, you've had a really good life.
Rule number 3 is find the right mentor.
I've had a lot of mentors in my career. Many of them were paid, a few of them were free. The point of a good teacher is that the student does pass the teacher. I see this thing that happens all the time. When you're a kid and you learn arithmetic, first you learn your numbers and then you learn how to add. You level up and you learn how to multiply. And then you level up from there and you learn algebra. When you get to algebra, you don't think, man, my arithmetic teacher was a f***ing idiot. I can't believe they didn't teach me this stuff. It's like, dude, you weren't ready. And you had to have the arithmetic in order to get to the multiplication. And it's not that that teacher was an idiot, it's that that was the sequence. And so when you have a first teacher that teaches you the basics and then you have a more advanced teacher later, it doesn't mean you should shit on your first teacher. It's like that person got you ready to receive the next thing. Earlier on in my career, I definitely did the other way. This guy didn't know anything, this guy is the guy. Rather than seeing it like you would see any other thing that you'd have in school. I've had the opportunity and the gift of being able to mentor, whatever you want to say, provide advice, counsel, share my experiences. A lot of people hold me in a regard, and most people who are winners are competitive. It's just like who you are, right? You want to win, you want to beat everybody, because that's part of the competitive drive. But I think there's a comma there that needs to get put in, which is that you have to accept two things. One is that you are going to die and no one is going to remember. Like real. 10,000 years from now, no one's going to remember at all. Number 2 is that when you're at the end of your life, the people who are going to be by your bedside are not the people who you vanquished, but the people that you helped. I know that I have passed a lot of the mentors that I've had in my career in terms of financials, etc. Earlier on, used to think that made me better than them. As I've had a couple more years and some more scars, I've realized something different, which is that I was only able to get better than them because they gave me the head start. Step on my shoulder, you can reach that next branch. I think I experience a lot of joy knowing that other people don't have to suffer as much. You know, we were walking around outside yesterday and someone's like, dude, I did everything you have and we're doing $4 million a year now. Like, he was like emotional just knowing that it's happening. It makes stomaching the hard times easier. It feels like it's not just me trying to do this for myself, it's me trying to do this for a lot of people. If I'm failing over and over again at this thing, I know that once I figure it out, I'll be able to help 100 people cheat code their way through it and not spend 5 months figuring something out or 2 years figuring something out. Like, I was stuck at mid 30 million for 3 years. To everyone watching, they're like, boo hoo. That's not the point. Is that there's another guy who's gonna get to that point and he's gonna move right past it, like in a blink of an eye, because he'll have had the right advice that I didn't have. And I think that if the mentees and the mentors both see it that way, then the mentees will stop on the mentors that help them, and the mentors will stop trying to hold back secrets that have propelled them further, because the point is not that you're gonna beat everyone. You're gonna get really old, and then you're gonna die. As you're getting older, there are gonna be people who are younger who had a head start. And as long as the next guy honors the fact that that guy died on the battlefield to give him these lessons and come back, and they have to recognize that they're going to die on the battlefield too for the next generation to pass them, they have it easier than us. That's the point of progress. And so rather than lamenting that the next generation has it easier, I thought that what we all say, I want to make the world a better place, well, that's what making the world a better place looks like. We say that this is our mission with our business. We want to make the world a better place. We want to make an impact. And then when it actually happens, we resent the kids for the fact that they didn't have it as hard as us. That was the point. My point is not to beat the progeny. My point is to forge as far as I can, look back and be like, hey, watch out for that hole, watch out for that rock, keep going, keep going. They move through the path that we tread 3 times faster than we did because we already cleared all the trees. They get to the next non-clearing and they have to start hacking away and hacking away and hacking away to forge the next path. And then they become the mentors, turn around, and the next generation moves 6 times as fast to cover my distance and their distance. If you look at some of the greatest success stories, a lot of them talk about their mentors. Warren Buffett had his mentor early on. The quick story on that was that he said, I'll work for you for free. And Paul Graham told him, you're overpriced. He was the one who's going to be giving far more to this relationship. Even if Warren gave him his time, he still was going to be on the losing side. But he still did it anyways because he recognized that Warren had a gift. Warren passed him in his career. You'll notice that Warren isn't like, man, I'm so much better than Paul Graham. I passed that dude in my 40s. He doesn't talk like that. We really do stand on the shoulders of the giants. When I think about the gratitude that I have for the Gary V's who's 12 years older than I am, he's forged so much of this path that I didn't have to think about how am I going to create this whole thing. It's like he already had a blueprint and I can just start laying that out, immediately execute. There are guys who we have in our portfolio right now who are in their 20s, who are making twice what I was making at 30. But if they came to me below and then now they're above, that was the point. Gary Vee didn't have Gary Vee to mentor him on his career. I do right now, we all do. Many of us will pass Gary, and I don't think Gary minds. There's a 20-year-old, and it might be you, who's watching this, and you've got me. That's the point. I'm still gonna be hustling and trying to beat you. Don't get me wrong. When I see guys who are in their 60s, I'm like, man, by the time I'm 60, I'm gonna be 10 times as wealthy as them. 10 times the real estate, I have 10 times the, yeah. But if they had themselves as mentors, they would too. If your mentees and the students that you have and the people that you help and the people that you teach don't move above you, it means that you're a bad teacher, not a good one. The new definition of success of a teacher is that the students surpass the teacher and then get to the point where they're both looking together with his experience and his raw talent, looking at the new landscape saying, all right, what do you think we should do?
Rule number 4 is invest your time wisely.
I think people have 2 sets of resources, right, that they allocate. So they've got time and they've got money.
Yeah.
And so if you look at someone's bank statement and you look at their calendar, you know what their life is. And you can also predict where their life is going to be in X amount of years, right? And so if someone wants to change what their life is going to look like, you have to reallocate where you're investing the resources that you have. And so from a time perspective, people who are poor, in my opinion, spend a lot of time not doing stuff. And that sounds terrible to say, but at the base level, they're distracted, they're
not doing the right
procrastinating.
stuff.
Right. Well, I would even say not doing anything.
Just distracting them,
Right.
Playing
Just
video games.
Netflix, et cetera, all that stuff, right? So there's the basis, they don't do anything. They're purely distracting themselves from their current state, which is hard because it's hard to confront reality. If you're not happy, it's easier to just distract yourself, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the level above that is you've got people who are operating, they are working every day, but they're operating in low leverage opportunities, right? So they're doing things that do not give them a lot of return on their time, right? And so it's I could work, it doesn't matter how many hours I work at McDonald's, it's very, very difficult to become wealthy there, right? It's just near impossible, right? Mm-hmm. Versus you could buy a building for $10 million and then sell it to somebody else for $11 million, just get the contract and make $1 million on the exchange. Super high leverage, right? From a time perspective, which is crazy for somebody who doesn't have money to even contemplate something like that. But the only way that that happened, and that required no money, is skill, right? And so like that's an example of like it didn't require money to make that money. That's skill that's required to do that. And so first is the time, right? People are not doing stuff with the time that they have, or they're doing low leverage activities with the time they have. And then they're not trying to increase their output per unit time, which means investing in their skill set. So like one of the easiest ways to gain leverage on your time, and when I say leverage, just for everybody, like leverage is the difference between inputs and outputs in a system. So, Archimedes said, if you give me a lever long enough, I can move the world. And so to the same degree, if you have enough skills, you can do anything, right? And so skills give you leverage on your time. So you get more out of each unit of time. So if I'm a master cold caller, I will get more sales and calls booked for the same unit of time than somebody who sucks at it. Same time, more output, right?
But because they developed a skill at a masterful level.
100%.
Yeah.
And so when people are allocating their time, they're not by percentage, they're kind of like consuming their time rather than investing their time. So they're either doing nothing or they're consuming the time rather than putting time into getting higher returns on their time, which is education, right? And so education you can have from like the conceptual learnings, watching stuff like this, or the actual doing, right? And so you learn
taking
more
action,
100%.
Failing, messing up, feeling like an embarrassment in the actions. Yeah.
The first 1,000 cold calls you make, the first 1,000 cold emails you do, the first 1,000 doors you knock on, the first 1,000, you'll learn more from that than you'll learn from every single book you read up to that point on the concept. You'll learn, right? And so people don't allocate nearly enough time to that in the beginning.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there.
Rule number 5 is find your happiness.
Deficits occur when we speak desires, right? And so I love this statement. A desire is a contract we make with ourselves to be unhappy until we get what we want. And so whenever we state a desire, like I want this amount of money, I want whatever, you literally sign a contract that says like, I won't be unhappy until that happens, right? And so like I had this thing earlier on where I was like, I want to have meaning. I want to have great meaning in my life. And I was talking to a guy who made a lot more money than me because I asked him, I said, how do you create and destroy meaning in your work? That was the question I asked him on a podcast. And he was like, why do you think life needs to be meaningful? And it was the same exact thing as the happiness versus like the meaning thing, where it's like, I say life has to be meaningful, and therefore everything that I'm doing, like I create this expectation of life. Whereas if life just is, it just is. And it's the only way that you can actually be there. It's just pure acceptance, right? Which is why like the whole like shoulds of like, we should work, we should have balance, we should X. It's like, I believe marriage is a compromise. Like these are just statements of belief that are casting expectations out in the world that are just bound to be untrue at some point and then create dissonance. And so it's like, I believe marriage is marriage, and I believe my marriage is my marriage, and I believe your marriage is your marriage. And like, I believe that I can work 24 hours a day if I want to. And that is all, period. Not, and it's bad or, and it's good. And there's no judgment on it. It just is. And so like, if I get dopamine secreted in my brain when I start working, cool. Like, and I will optimize for dopamine. And if I die, I know that in 1,000 generations, nothing I do anyways is going to matter. So who cares? Like, that's like the opening thing in my book is like, there are no rules. Like we live in this shoulds and have tos and like happiness. Everyone talks about it. And it's just like, everyone is unhappy because they say they want to be happy rather than being like, accepting like, fuck happiness. Like I just am, period. And then like, I don't need to judge the am, it just is.
Rule number 6 is learn how to earn.
As a quick, pro tip for everybody, if you've got stuff that people ask you to do for them because you're good at it, maybe you're good at tech. It's like, can you help me set up my like Wi-Fi and stuff, blah, blah, blah. It's like, that means you're solving problems. You can charge, like what people ask you to do as a favor is an indication of the things that you can charge for later, right? So I had all these people who were asking me, not all these, a handful of people who would ask me for programs and stuff. And so what I did was, during my last year of consulting, I started something called the Free Training Project. And so the Free Training Project was, I would charge $500 to $1,000 but I wouldn't charge it. They had to donate that to the charity of their choice in exchange to work with me, right? And so that way I wanted people to value it, but they weren't paying me directly. So they'd get a write-off. They felt good. I had a ton of goodwill also in the marketplace too, because I was like, I'm doing all this stuff for charity. I got all these people reaching out to me like, this is so cool, blah, 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 right? And so after a year of doing that, I had probably, 12 really good like great before and after pictures that I had collected from my clients. And I told them that was part of the deal. I was like, you have to donate it. I would like to do this for real later, but you have to let me use your testimonial. And they were like, that's fine. So once I had that, I had those first, 10, 12 customers who had great before and after pictures. I transitioned many of those customers, said, hey, I'm going to do this full time now. Are you comfortable paying the same amount you were paying to charity, except just making it charity of Alex, because Alex can't eat either. And that was actually how I transitioned from not for profit or donating everything. And I didn't even set up the entity. I just told them to just literally donate it and send me the screenshot. I didn't even do anything like that. And so I didn't have a website. All I had was an LLC and a PayPal account. So like for everybody who's like, I don't know how to start a business. I was like, you literally just need a bank account and a way to process money. That is it. Like 2 things. And you can Google how to figure it out. If you can't figure it out from Google, entrepreneurship might not be for you. All right. But you think about, there's 30 million businesses in the United States. 30 million other people have figured this out, which means you can too. So bank account, payment processing. Make the first 10 free or some sort of charitable thing so that people don't feel weird, or you don't feel weird about selling, et cetera. After you have it, after you're providing this service to people, you can transition people from free service to paid service. And if they don't want to start paying you, then that gives you insight as to either you suck, right? Or they suck, which is also possible too. But either way, a certain percentage of those people will continue to stay and pay you. And now you have income. Now, you can also ask those people for referrals, which is exactly what I did. So I think half that business came in just from, the initial ones came in from friends and family and me posting. And so I'll close the loop on what I said earlier. A year later, after I had those testimonials, I made a public post being like, hey, I've got this thing now. I made a website, that was my big announcement. I made a website. I still have the post. I found it. It's 2013. I was like, I made a website, and I am now open for business. And so if you would like, training stuff, let me know. This is what I'm doing now. And I had some testimonials, and go check out the site, whatever. And so from there, I was able to get, I think, about 20 guys who were willing to let me do just like almost bodybuilding type stuff. Because I was kind of like, I was powerlifting bodybuilder back then. And so I want to say I got 20 guys at $200 a month. And so I was making $4,000 a month from those people. And it took me 4 hours every Saturday to do the fulfillment.
What was the fulfillment?
I would just update their training programs and send them nutrition, update their macros, updated meal plans, and then new workout split for the week, et cetera. And then everyone had my cell phone, and I would just text them the new stuff. And if they had any questions, they could hit me up. It was a very simple business. And so that's what I did. It was just one-on-one online. And it only took me 4 hours on Saturday morning. And to show you what kind of person I am, I hated it. Even though I loved fitness, I hated having to do the same thing every day, on the delivery side. So I ended up having the genius idea of saying, I need to own a gym, because then I'll be a business owner. I'm really just self-employed right now. And so that's what got me to start my gym, rather than probably doing the wiser decision and saying, okay, this costs you 4 hours a week and you're making $4,000 a month. Maybe you should do this for 40 hours a week.
Rule number 7 is reframe your thinking.
If you think about us as kids, right? Like how do you orient yourself with the world? You get reinforced or punished at all phases, directly, indirectly, but you get reinforced or punished, and the things that you get reinforced, you do more of. The things you get punished, you do less of, right? Like that's just how we learn behavior, how we learn to function in society, right? Touch that thing, it hurts. We got punished. Okay, your parent tells you to sit down and be quiet and eat, and you learn to sit down and shut up and eat. And then we wonder why adults don't move, because we're told to sit when we're running around, right? We learn
at school, sit down and be quiet.
100%.
Yeah.
And we wonder why we eat so much when the reward for everything we did when we were a kid was food, right? We wonder these things. So the reason external validation is so hard, at least for me, is because it's how I learned everything. Is because external validation gave me the directional guidance of what's good and what's not. And then as you get older, it's where am I going to get that validation from? And so I would say that my external validation is still 100% there. It just comes from different sources. So I'm more selective on whose validation I want.
So how much external validation do you need in order to overcome this belief to go all in and do it in half the time?
Yeah. No, I think I need to be able to validate myself. And that's fundamentally, I think Epictetus said this. He said, like, if you need someone else's, he has this quote, it's so good, but it's basically like, you need to be able to you don't need to swear to somebody else. You should be able to swear to yourself and bear witness to yourself, because your word should be good enough.
So you need to eliminate external validation.
Right.
From you feeling good enough.
Probably, yeah. It's probably that. Like, obviously, it's good to have feedback in life.
Of course,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
And so I think that's why it's also difficult for some in general, because it's not eliminate or have more of. It's to what degree and from whom and about what. And so then it gets a little bit more complex. But even using those different lenses, I think it's good to unpack it for anyone who's listening, which is like, okay, Leila said this, so this is not mine. But most times when we're afraid of something, it's not actually like this amorphous crowd that we're afraid of. It's like one or two people's opinion. Like, it's your dad or it's your whatever it is, right? And you're worried about what they're going to think. And they're not even thinking about you, but you think they're thinking about it. They're thinking about their dad, right? He's not thinking about it, whatever it is, right? And so she restated this earlier on in like when we were together 5 years ago. She was like, and she like made me name the person. It wasn't my dad, it was somebody else for this particular thing. She was like, are you going to let this guy stop us from getting what we want?
Wow.
And it was like, when I saw it, it was just like looking in front of me. I was like, she's like, what if this guy hates you and thinks you're terrible? Is that a worthy enough reason to still keep going? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, then let's go. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so she was very good with that.
Rule number 8 is focus on one thing.
It's first you develop the skills, right? At a proficient level. Then you dive deep on those skills so that you get better and better at them. And typically that comes through consistent execution and repetition, which means that it takes the character traits of focus and determination and drive, right? And being able to be consistent and not go away and start looking at shiny objects, looking at a new opportunity, looking at this other side hustle you want to do, whatever it is, right? Because there's always new things. And what's crazy about this is that the higher up you go, the more seductive the woman in the red dress looks like. And I'm saying that from Matrix is my all-time favorite movie. The woman in the red dress, I'm using this as a parable or whatever, a visual for opportunity. And when you're starting out, the woman in the red dress always looks attractive. And the thing is that the higher up you go, the more of a 10 she becomes. Now, if you're a girl, then, I don't know, guy in a red suit, whatever. I don't know, maybe that looks more like a pimp, so forget about that. But whatever, George Clooney or whoever your person is, whatever, you get my point. Is that, like, I thought that I was having discipline and saying no to a certain level of opportunity when I was starting my gyms, right? And I had to develop that discipline. And then we started making a few $1 million a year. And I was like, okay, I need to develop a new level of discipline because there's more things that I want to do that I have to not be able to do, right? One of the biggest successful things I did was not start the supplement company until a year and a half after, almost 2 years after Gym Launch started. All right. I had planned starting the supplement company at the same time as I started Gym Launch Original 3.5, 4 years ago. Like they at the same time I wanted to do both. And Leila, the angel that she is, was like, no, that's stupid. Don't do that. And so she thankfully was like, you have to stay focused. And so because of that, we were able to have the explosive growth that we did. And then at the right time, we were able to bolt that on. Now, big picture, I don't know if I would have done it again. I still probably would have stayed even more focused on Gym Launch if I could do it all over again. Now, we have it. We write a check for $600,000 every single month to our gym lords in terms of commission checks. So that's real money that I get to send back to the community, and that's very fulfilling for me. And it solved a problem that I always had when I had my gym. So like there are reasons that I did it, and so like history will tell whether it was the right call or not. I can never live the life of what it would have been if I hadn't done it. But I think if I were going back in time, knowing what I know now, I might not have done it. But you never know. So I'm telling you, like I've made these mistakes. You know what I mean? And the thing is that level of opportunity looked even more seducing or seducing or whatever the word is when we had 2 years more of a distribution base compared to when we had at the beginning. And so I wasn't able to say no to her that opportunity later on as I was in the beginning. And that was a deficiency in my skill set at the time, my character trait of staying focused, right? And so, like I'm saying all this, if you're looking at it in terms of in verticals, the first step is filling the holes, and that's stacking all the skills together so you can get the first dollar to go over. And that's just becoming proficient, not amazing, just proficient. You don't have to be an expert at running traffic. You just need to be able to actually know how to run an ad. And the thing is that most proficient skills only take like not a lot of time. Like you can Google how to do X, and if you consume for like 2 hours of information, you'll probably be proficient. Most people just don't take those 2 hours to do it because it's uncomfortable and you're not good at it, right? So you consume the information and then you try, right? And then you fail because you're not good at it. You learn, and then just use those first initial tries. You learn more in your first 20 sales than you do in the first 20 hours of learning about sales stuff, right? You first time you actually step in the ring, you learn more about fighting than you do during all the time that you were practicing, right? Because it's real, right? So you're developing, you're stacking your skills and you're becoming proficient at it. Next step, you have to do repetition and being willing to get punched in the face over and over and over again, right? So that you can deepen those skills. And that's what amplifies the skills that you have so that you can get to another level. Then as you get to another level, then your character traits need to be strong so you can stay the course. All right, like the biggest thing in the book by Angela Duckworth called Grit, which is really interesting, is that the people who are most successful in life just stick with it. Like grit is stick-to-itness is what it is. So it's how likely are you to abandon a certain path to pursue another thing, right? And the people in the beginning have very low stick-with-itness, entrepreneurs, shiny object, shiny object, shiny object. They're jumping from opportunity to opportunity, and they never give any of the opportunities a chance to be successful. So one of the interesting things that maybe you can think about in terms of a quote that you can take with you is you can be successful at anything you want, just not everything you want. All right, that was a huge lesson for me. All right, I had a friend from high school who reached out who had a contracting business and a roofing business, and they were flipping houses. So it's 3 separate businesses. And I was like, dude, like, what do you want help with? And he was like, I don't know, like, what do you think I should do? And I was like, pick one. He's like, well, we're making money in all 3 of them. And I was like, cool. Pick one. Each one of those businesses can be $1 billion business. You can be $1 billion roofing company. You can be $1 billion flipping homes company. You can be $1 billion general contractor. There are examples of each of these things, right? But you just can't be $1 billion in all of them. And so there's a fallacy that we tell ourselves as entrepreneurs, which is that if I do more things, I will make more money, when in fact, I need to do fewer things to get to where I want to go. And the reason I can tell you that it's the truth is because you naturally think the other way. And that's what most people think, which is why most people aren't successful. Right? It's they can't focus because there's too many things. It's just so easy to just add this one thing or do this other thing. And all of a sudden you're too spread thin. And you're not focused on amplifying the things that you're doing to get better. You're not deepening the skills. You're spreading yourself thinner.
Rule number 9 is make a living out of your passion.
I've got employees that make $1 million a year plus. So like you can absolutely become filthy wealthy, and that's income, right? And so a lot of businesses that are at $10 million a year, the owner might only take $1 million in income, depending on, margins, et cetera. And so like, a lot of employees will wish for, they see top line as income, which is just a very employee mindset. They're like, oh, if I make 6 figures a year, I'll make 6 figures a year. It's like, well, if you really want to make 6 figures a year, I'll probably make 500 grand a year. Revenue wise, at least. If you don't want to have just bought yourself another job, right? Because so let's talk through this transition. So if you're an employee, when you make the switch, you're still an employee. You're just an employee of a different business that you happen to own, and you are basically 100% of the expenses. And so the business itself actually makes no money. You, as the sole employee of that thing and the boss, gets to call your own shots, but you were still the employee, right? So you're wearing all the hats, et cetera. And so it's relatively nuanced. You know what I mean? Like if you had a 6-figure consulting job and then you start consulting on the side, for example, through your own LLC, you have the same job. You just got rid of the person who was giving you direction, and now you are responsible, right? The thing that most people have to do is they have to go get money, right? You have to go make money. And the way you do that is you sell stuff, right? And the way that you can even begin the conversation to sell stuff is that you have to have people who show interest in the thing, which means you have to make your products known. And we do that through advertising, right? And there's 5 ways to advertise, which I just went over earlier. And so it's like, pick one of those 5 ways, start doing it on a consistent basis, bring people in. What do you sell them? That's what the $100 million offers book is for. Is like, this is how you figure out what to sell. And then you sell them the thing. And then after that, you'll have some delivery. Now, usually if you have a consistent method of advertising and selling with a what to sell from the offer, then you can start getting people to help you on the level of delivery you have, which comes down to breaking the delivery into chunks rather than holistically, and saying, how can I specialize the labor? Because you trying to say, I just need somebody to do what I do is silly, right? You need to figure out, how can somebody do How can I get 5 people to do 20% of what I'm doing and do it consistently, right? And then you can increase your advertising. Sales is a very high leverage thing in the beginning. If you spend all day selling, just you would have enough for 5 people to do work, right? And so then you would have a business.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is remove distractions.
The most important lessons that I've learned in my life have come from doing and mentors. And so on a day-to-day basis, it's reducing the time between when you wake up and when you begin working, right? A lot of people lollygag and delay and procrastinate and things like that. And if you just think about there's only a certain amount of time in the day, I want to increase my output per unit of time as much as possible. A lot of people have these superstitions that they have to do a certain thing or they must do X, Y, and Z. But all you have to do is talk to a single mom who has like 5 kids and they still start businesses. They're not doing any of that stuff. They're waking up and they're working before their kids are up, and then once their kids go to bed, they work then too, right? And they're not doing all the lollygag stuff that you see trending all over social media. It's like they're working. And so like the single greatest skill, in my opinion, is being able to find a place that you can shut out external stimuli and you can focus.
Yes.
Because for me, the single highest ROI habit that I have is that for me, between 5 a.m. and noon, I have nothing on my calendar. It is just work, no meetings, and then all my meetings happen after noon. This is for the entrepreneur. Now, if you're like in a job right now, then it's got to be in the morning before you go to work and in the evening after you come back from work. But like having that dedicated time, and if you're like, well, I'm not a morning person, fine, then just work late. Like that's okay. Like I've got billionaire buddies who are like, oh, I wake up at 10. But they work really late. That's their special time that no one bothers them. It tends to be at the bookends of the day though, just from my experience, because in the middle of the day you get pestered and it's hard to get into that deep focus, that deep learning that you get when you really pour yourself into something. I love the saying, in our 20s, we're concerned about what everyone thinks about us. In our 40s, we don't care what anyone thinks about us. And in our 60s, we realize that no one was thinking about us to begin with.
Right.
And I just feel like who else have you thought about today besides yourself? Probably not. I mean, you have your kids, which is an extension of yourself, but you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Not a lot. And so most people are like that. And, a lot of it, like we have a lot more leeway than I think we give ourselves credit for. And I think the more that I have now, I'll say accomplished with quotes, in material success, the more I am excited about the things that I can do. And that was why the opening of the book was like, there are no rules. And it just took me a very long time to realize that. And I continue to unlearn rules that I thought existed, as I continue to, go on this journey.
Yeah, I love that idea of unlearning.
I think we all just try and go back to being like we were when we were children. Just because when you're a child, you're purely present, right? You're just present in the moment. Yeah. And I don't like the word happy very much. I prefer using joy because you can mourn joyfully, right? Because it's internal rather than happiness, which I feel is more like happenstance. It's more from external. And so, what are the things that bring me joy? What are the things that I find joy in? And I think for anyone who's listening, it's a much harder question to answer. What are the things that bring me joy than answering the question, what are the things I hate? And it's easier to correct those first. Be like, well, I hate my job and I hate my relationship and I hate the city. Okay, those are all very changeable. And a lot of times you get there by inversion. Well, if I wanted to destroy my life, I wanted to have the worst life possible, what would I do? And then taking all those things that you would do to really destroy your life and make your life miserable and then reverse them. It's a much easier way to solve the positive psychology equation, in my opinion. You need someone who you can trust. Like if you're giving someone your money, or you're trying to take someone's advice or counsel, you need to trust their intentions, all right? And so it's not just whether they have integrity, it's whether they have your best interest in mind, all right? So I'm gonna get to how I solve for that in a second, but that is the first character trait that you need of a counsel, of somebody, of any kind of counsel, really, whether it's investment law, et cetera. The second is efficacy or their skill set, right? So let's think of different scenarios here. So let's say you might trust your mom implicitly, but she doesn't have the skill of knowing much about, how to structure insurance policies or trusts or, investments in tech startups, right? She might not have that skill, but you might trust her intention, right? For you specifically. On the reverse of that, you might see that there's this person who's got lots of skill, is prodigious in this, but it also means that they know exactly how to screw you if they want to, right? Which is one of the double-sided things of being really good at something, right? You know all the details, you know how to write the agreement, structure the deals in order to make sure that you get the best outcome, right? And so the idea is to find someone who has both your best interest at heart and has the ability to deliver on what you want. Right? And so it's both of these things. And so you're like, well, yeah, maybe that seems obvious for me. Just even boiling it down to that was very helpful for me, because when I look through advisors, look for people who I want to get counsel from, I have to look at these two things. All right. So here's how I test for the integrity piece, and here's how you can kind of control for risk here. Right. One is I always try and interview as many advisors as humanly possible. All right. And I do that because I'm going to get as much information from each of the counsel during this process that will give me perspective from which to make a judgment. Right. One of the biggest problems with this, like if you think about Julie, who's trying to lose weight, right? She goes to the gym and then she talks to 10 personal trainers. One personal trainer says, it's all about high fat, low carb. Another guy says, hey, don't worry about that keto stuff. It's all about high carb, low fat. And then another guy says, no, you really just need a balanced thing. And then another guy says, it's only about calories. It's only about counting your macros. And so you get this huge perspective so that hopefully you can make a judgment call. Otherwise, when you talk to the first guy and he says, it's all about keto, then you're like, well, I guess this is it, right? I guess these guys all have opinions, when in reality, there is a truth. You just don't have the perspective from which to make a judgment yet. And so the first step in this is that I interview as many as I possibly can from reputable sources. So this is where I reach out to my network, I make posts, et cetera, to try and get as many referrals as I can. All right. So that's step one. Step two for the integrity piece is that I try and have aligned incentives. Now, a lot of times there are incentive systems that appear aligned, but are not in reality. So let me give you an example. So in the real estate market, if you're a realtor, for example, you may think, oh, this realtor has my best interest at heart, right? Because they have an incentive to sell the house. And so that is why they're going to get compensated. So they want to sell it for as much as possible. But they aren't incentivized to sell it for as much as possible. They're incentivized to sell it as fast as possible and get a deal closed. All right. And so think about this. For you, selling a house for $500,000 that's worth $500,000 is a normal, that's normal. That's the market price, right? But for you to make an extra, let's say $25,000 or $50,000 would be really material. That would be a huge extra outcome for you. You would probably push a lot harder to get the extra $25,000 or $50,000. Now, let's say that you could probably sell it in a day at $450,000 because it's below the market value of the house, right? Now, here's what's crazy is that if a selling realtor, total it might be 7%, 2% goes to the buyer and 5% goes to the seller. If 5% is going to your realtor, 5% of $500,000, right, is $25,000. Okay. And so for them, the $50,000 decrease to drop you from 500 to 450 means that they're going to give up $2,500. So they're going to make $22,500. So let me ask you a question. Now, in the reverse, if they sell for $525, they're going to get $27,500, right? And so it's a $5,000 swing off of a $25,000 nut for them, and one of them might take them 3 months, and one of them might take them a day. So what is their incentive? Their incentive is to make as much money as possible per unit of time. And so they're incentivized to sell as fast as possible. And so this is one of those things where you have to put your thinking cap on and say, are our incentives truly aligned? And so when we're looking at this, when I say there's two aspects that I look for counsel or somebody who's going to help me do something financially, legally, insurance-wise, whatever it is. So first is that integrity piece, and are their incentives aligned? The incentives being aligned, and you could restructure that deal and say, hey, you know what? You're going to get 0% on anything below $400,000. I'll give you 3% on anything between 400 and 450. And then from 450 and up, I'll give you 20%, right? Or 15% or whatever, right? And so now they're highly incentivized to push, and now your incentives are aligned because each increment for you is worth almost as much as it is to them. And that is how you would align incentives. All right. Now, how do you test for the second thing, which is their skill set? This one's hard, all right, especially if you don't have the perspective from which to make a judgment, which when I enter new things, when I'm trying to learn about trust, when I'm trying to learn about investment things and different vehicles, I'm learning about storage units, I'm learning about you're like, oh man, there's so much stuff and there's so much nuance that you have to have, right? And so the first thing is I like to usually read 2 to 3 books on the topic, all right? And I read 2 to 3 books just so I don't appear like an idiot. And so I can at least understand what they're saying, and they're going to respect you it's kind of like defense. If you bring at least some level of knowledge, they don't feel like they're going to take advantage of you. So this is a first thing that I do, and this is because I don't like feeling exposed in these types of conversations. The second thing you can do is if you have someone that you can trust, you can bring them in alongside you. And the third thing that you can do, which is probably the most and highest recommended, is repeating the same action I said in the first hand, which is try and talk to as many of them as possible, and then you will gather the insights and you'll see the people who demonstrate the most expertise. And what you can do is take what one person says and say, well, what about this? And see what they reply with. Right? And as you gain more and more knowledge, and this is how so in the consulting world, this is qualitative research, right? This is where you're literally doing interviews essentially to gather information so that you can make an informed decision, right? And so when you do these interviews, and this is the lazy part, this is what most people don't do, is they won't do this work, right? They won't take the time to interview 20 people or 10 people when in reality, these one decisions, the guy who you decide to, invest in their fund, or if you decide to buy this building or invest in a fund that buys X, Y, and Z, right? Or you have somebody who manages your portfolio, whatever it is, right? That one decision can be one of the most, if not the biggest influence on your total net worth over a long period of time. And people take more time to figure out where they want to go on vacation than where they're going to put their money, right? And so my ask to you is that if you put these lenses on, think about both of these lenses. Lens one, do I think this person is integrous? Do I think this person has my best interest at heart? And then two, do they have the skill to deliver on that promise? Because I don't want my mom doing my investments. I know she has my best at heart, but she has no idea what she's doing. And then I don't want somebody who absolutely knows what they're doing and does not have my best interest at heart, right? Which honestly, unfortunately, is a lot more of the cases that you'll come up with. And candidly, a lot of times they're literally incentivized against you. In the insurance industry, they're kind of incentivized to rip you off. It's pretty terrible. And there's a lot of industries like that. Mortgage brokers are incentivized to rip you off. And so you really have to look at it from both lenses. And these types of decisions can make the biggest impact on your net worth and your financial future simply based on who you decide to work with. Why are you trying to change people's perception of you when you can just change who you are and let their perceptions catch up? The only way you're going to change your reputation is by being different. He's like, you need to stop being this person that does all these things and your reputation will catch up. And even if it doesn't, you'll always know. Honestly, it barely scratched the surface because my ego was so high and I was like, no, I just have to think of a better way to market myself. But I ended up knowing that he was very serious about the threat of pulling me out of school if I didn't get my grades up. And so what I ended up doing for the next half of the semester of my first semester of freshman year is I didn't go out at all. I didn't drink anymore. I really didn't hang out with girls at all. And all I did was study. And I was able to pull it might have been 1.2. It was very low, up to a 3.2. For the semester, which basically meant I got an A on everything from that point for the rest of the semester. And so when I went back home, he was like, well, now you know you can do it. And so we should always expect that is what you're going to get from here on out. And it also kind of proved it to myself too. I was like, I guess I can do this. And you know what happened is after I started switching that way, people still thought of me as a whore. And I still had to deal with that. It took 2 years to really reverse the reputation that I had acquired in the first 3 months. I think during that period of time, I grew an appreciation for how easy it is, especially in first impressions, to set the wrong one, and how hard it is to overcome a negative impression. And my reputation overall, the realization I had was there's too many people that you're interacting with in the world to try and curate reputation. The only way to change your reputation is to change who you are. Reputation is fundamentally just what people say about you, to your face and behind your back. I'm not saying that you need to care about what everyone else thinks. That's not really the point of this. It's much more, if one person says you're an asshole, whatever. If every person you know says you're an asshole, you might be an asshole. And so if you have one of those situations where you feel like the proof or the evidence is overwhelming and you might even believe it, then it's probably you. I think that for me, getting out of the whole I can control this and try and curate what people think about me and transitioning to be at the end of the day, I'm the only person who knows who I am and I don't like who I am. And just saying well, how can I get to a point where I would like me? Even if everyone else hated me, how can I like me? When I started operating from that place, it really changed my life because then I started thinking what version of me do I want to be and what does that guy do? Well, that guy studies really hard and that guy works out really hard and that guy's a really good friend. He's always respectful, doesn't have an ego. And it took me a long time and I still work on this stuff. You know what I mean? I'm not saying I'm done by any stretch of the imagination. But I think that if you can simply shift the perspective of I'm going to try and appear this way to I want to be this way. If it just so happens to get captured, great. And if it doesn't, great. And there's this quote by Epictetus that I'm probably going to butcher, but he says, if you need someone else to tell you something about yourself, you are out of integrity because you can always be your own witness. I think that that's a great point to wrap this little video lesson up with, because that piece strikes to the core of everything, which is we are our own witnesses. And if we want to change our reputation, we need to change our reputation with ourselves first. And then eventually it will reflect in the world. There are a lot of different things that come up in the business world where I will see people conflate or mistake what thing they are solving, right? And most times when I'm talking to a newer entrepreneur or even a more established entrepreneur and they reach out for help or guidance or whatever, right? Or it's one of our portfolio companies, most times they'll start talking, right, really fast about all this stuff to try and provide context. And I'll just usually pause them and be like, what problem are we solving? It usually gets them to stop, right? And I would highly advise you, if you have subordinates or you have direct reports who roll into you and they have a whole bunch of decisions, a lot of times you can get caught, and sometimes ourselves too, we can get caught in the day-to-day, the minutia, and just simply pause and say, what problem are we solving? There's so many pieces of this that I want to unpack that I think are going to be really interesting for you. But the first one is, when you define what problems you are solving, you may even have to ask the question, is it a problem? When some people are like, well, hey, we're getting, customer service complaints. It's like, okay, understood. Is this something that we believe that we can reasonably eliminate? Is this something that is catastrophic to the business, or is this something that we can kind of try and improve over time, through systems and process, right? And so a lot of times people misprioritize problems because they perceive them as threats to existence, when in reality they are a course of doing business and things that we can consistently improve, right? Especially if you're newer. You're starting out, of course your product's not going to be perfect yet, right? You're just getting going. But you improve these things rather than thinking I have to stop everything to fix this problem, right? And so the first frame shift is that most people think in terms of like, I have a problem to solve rather than a dichotomy to be managed, as in these are two things that will always exist. All right, I'll give you a different example of this. Actually, this will be a fun one. The reason we will probably never have people who are all happy about a tax code is because you cannot have both fairness and equality. Equality means everyone pays 10%. Fairness means the rich people pay more than the poor people. That's fair. This is equal. Both are ideals. And yet, somehow they're not the same thing. And yet both are right. And so because of that, we will always have this conflict. It's the same thing between justice and mercy. Both of them are ideals. Both of them are right. And yet somehow they're conflicting. And so we see these situations, and this is why I'm trying to hopefully give this to you, because the more I started to recognize these patterns, the more quickly I could recognize them and then identify them and then either dismiss them or say, oh, it's another one of those, right? It's a pattern recognition. It's like, oh, you guys are spending all this effort trying to solve a problem that is unsolvable. This is a dichotomy that must be managed and will never be eliminated. And so I think my goal with this video is, if I can help you get out of these little mental hamster wheels, it's been incredibly valuable for me. All right. So that's the dichotomy. That's like one of the things that people will mistake. They'll mistake a dichotomy for a problem that needs to be solved. All right. Another framework that I find immensely valuable is the concept of a continuum versus a binary. All right. This is probably one of the biggest mental errors that people make when they're trying to identify things. And this is what I mean by that. So, for example, I might say, I'll use a weight loss example. So people will say something like, I am off my diet or I'm on my diet, right? It's a very simple thing. And that's because psychologically we like to be binary. We like to label things as yes or no. But biology and reality exists on continuums, as in, to what extent did you go off of your diet, right? Did you go 200 calories over? Did you go 500 calories over? And even though it is, quote, more difficult to think in this way, it is also more accurate. And so our brain uses binaries as placeholders for decision-making to store data, right? When in reality, when you start storing all these binary decisions, they start adding up and you start getting more and more inaccurate, if that's a word, on your decision-making process, because you're actually basing your decisions not on facts, but based on binary shorthand that your brain saves. And so that is one of the biggest mistakes that I see all the time in thinking in entrepreneurs and really in anything in general, because we like to have that shorthand. It is easier, right? It's easier to say, I fell off my diet, or I am diabetic, when the reality is, it's not whether you are diabetic, it's how diabetic are you, right? Kind of interesting. I stole that from Dr. Cashy, but I just love that. Who's my closest friend? He's a biochemist, and we talk about this stuff all the time. Point being, if you can think about this within, I'll give you a business example. So if we have a binary where people are saying yes or no, which is, let's say, Facebook doesn't work. Marketing doesn't work. I hear these statements all the time, and you may laugh at this, right? But I get DMs like this all the time. Facebook doesn't work for me. Marketing doesn't work for me. Like, you can't sell this way in my business, right? And so people want to shorten a problem into yes, it works, no, it doesn't work, when so much of business and problem solving is understanding the nuance between where we're starting and where we're going. And it's to what extent has Facebook not worked, right? Where is the fall off? Right? It is not that it doesn't work. It is just, we only got it to work this %, right? Now we need to get all the way over the hump to get there, but it's to what extent? And I think that if you can ask the right questions, if you can see the problems as they truly are, they become far more solvable. And so this has been probably, I just gave you two of my best frames that I think with all the time. All right, so I'll say these again. So the first mental lapse, I'll say, that I see all the time is mistaking a dichotomy that needs to be managed for a problem that needs to be solved. People do this in their marriages as well, right? So you look at your wife, right? You look at your wife and you're like, I need more variety, right? But later you're like, I need more consistency. And you're like, we have to figure this out. We need variety. We need consistency. It's like, yes, you need both, right? And so it's not a problem to be solved. It's a dichotomy to be managed. How do we behave? The reason that this is so important is that it's one thing to know where you're going, but it's another thing to know how you're going to get there. And so this is just as true in business partnerships and marriage in terms of what you want to have happen and how you want to get there as it is in business, okay? And so what I want to do is actually just walk you through the 3 values that we have at acquisition.com and why we believe them. And so from an overarching perspective, the way to come to values is to look at what are the non-negotiables, okay? And so what I mean by that is, and every company is different, because the core thing about values is that they have to be things that are true and innate to you, right? Like for example, at Southwest, have fun is one of their core values. And if someone does not want to have fun or does not believe in the processes that they do to have a good time, then that is a non-negotiable for them. That person cannot work at that company. It is a fireable offense. And so these are not aspirational. These are not things that you would like to have. These are things that are core to who you are as a person and as a team. All right. And so when you decide on these non-negotiables, they are by their very nature non-negotiable, which means that you hire based on these, you fire based on these. And these are the core spirit of the team. And some of the mistakes that I see when people make values is that, one, they don't draw the line in the sand. And so one of the core things about a value is that you have to be able to say, this is not this, right? You have to be able to say, okay, between justice and mercy, we lean towards justice, or we lean towards mercy, which means you have to repel people with your values, all right? And so if your values do not repel people, then they are not values, they are platitudes, okay? And so it's very important. The next thing is that when you're making your values, the values themselves need to be ideally said in words that you would normally say. So if you have little sayings inside of your community, then a lot of times those can become some of the values you have. So for example, at Gym Launch, one of our first portfolio companies, speed is king, do the boring work. These were different ways. I mean, we could just say work ethic, but that's not the way we would have said it. We could have said be fast or fast turnaround times, but speed is king was the way we would have said it, okay? And so some of the things that I've learned with this is also, you cannot have too many values, as in, I'll say it differently. You can have too many values. You have to be very selective at the true core values of the company. All right. And so if you're, between two, a lot of times you just have to chunk up and kind of get a broader value, but they become the core. And I think that what we have found is that 3 is the sweet spot. And that number has continued to distill down over time. But I think 3 is the amount that your human brain can comprehend as lenses to make a decision, right? And the reason these values are so important is that when you scale the company, you have to scale decision-making, which means you have to scale the frame with which you duplicate the decision-making process, which is, should I hire this person even though Alex is not involved in this? Do they align with the core values? And the more stringent the values, the easier it is to have a black and white example of, I think this person meets 2 out of the 3 or 1 out of 3, but we only accept 3 out of 3. And I will tell you this as an additional point. If you have core values in the business, I would relay them to all aspects of your life. If you would not do business with someone for a decade, do not do business with them for a day. It's one of the Navalisms that I like a lot. And so if you don't want to deal with this client for a decade, don't deal with them for a day. If you wouldn't deal with this employee for a decade, don't deal with them for a day. You have to, and the extent to which you hold your line of intolerance around these truly non-negotiables will dictate the health of the organization. And if you make these non-negotiables and realize that there are people in your organization, in your client base, that do not ascribe to these, then you must make the changes to fix it. And that is the pruning of the tree that will ultimately grow the tree. All right. These are the short-term pains for the long-term gains. In a perfect world, if everyone had absolute information and everyone was unbelievably well trained and you had a great infrastructure and all that stuff, then yes, the more products and services you offer, in theory, you would make more money. But we don't live in that theoretical world most of the time, and most small business owners are not that good at operating, right? It's the number one issue they have. They're super disorganized. They feel like they're spinning their wheels all day. Their team completely has no idea which way they're going. They change things all the time, etc. And so in an effort to combat that, we have used this process over and over again, and it has worked very well. So it is as follows. We sell two things, and I've done this in virtually every business that I've ever owned. We sell two things, two products or two services, and this is once we're going from 1 to 10 million. All right, 0 to 1 million, you sell one product, one service, one avatar. All right, that's it. One channel, one product, one avatar. That's it. All right, but once you're going from 1 to 3-ish million, and you're trying to go to 10. You introduce the second product line. And so here's how this works. If you have two things that you sell, you'll have a front end thing and you'll have a back end thing. We can still have a massive accommodation in the buying curve based on the payment terms that we introduce. So for example, people will look at their monthly expense more than the total contract value. That's a huge money hack. I'm giving you right now. This is a wealth hack. This is something that will make you a fortune in your life if you can properly understand this. People do not look at the length or the total contract they're signing. They will only pay attention to what is it going to cost me every month, because no one is good with their money. All right, so they only look at the cash flow expense month over month over month, and they just think, can I make it happen? Yes, cool, I'll sign. They don't think about the total contract value. For you as a business owner, the contract value matters almost more than anything. So I'll give you a quick hack on this. Total side note, tangent for you, life hack. Pro tip, if you want to extend the contract value that you have, I have a saying, which is the bigger the head, the longer the tail. All right. And so what that means is the more you can get someone to pay up front, and relative to the upfront cost of signing up or what they paid down, the lower their contractual recurring payment is, the stickier it will be. So I'll give you an example. If I had someone sign up for $99 a month for whatever, it doesn't matter, that price point might be medium sticky depending on the value that I have. Now imagine I had someone pay $5,000 down and $99 a month after that. How much more sticky would it be? Significantly more sticky. Now, the beauty is if you have one of these upfront type payments, you can also use that to liquidate your ad costs, cover your commissions for the salesperson, cover the upfront fulfillment and onboarding, which is going to cost more for a new customer than an existing customer. And so you can build all that in. If you know that the thing that you are selling has very high gross margins, then you can still have a lower cost as long as you know that the person is going to stay for a long time. And so based on how you structure the pricing, you can actually you can use the pricing to actually get people to stick longer. Pro tip complete. That is it. Moving back to the original thing that I was talking about. In one of our portfolio companies, we actually had this as a really in-depth discussion that we had to make a decision about. All right. And so they had a different, mentor, person, whatever, advice, who told them that they should have 3 products, and they should have a low, a medium, and a high product. And then based on what the salesman thought, the salesman would sell them the low, medium, or high. In my experience, it is not that effective. And that is because the salesperson can't decide which of these things they're trying to sell most of the time. And so what we have found is more effective is you give the salesperson the one dream to sell. This thing is going to solve this person's problem, and we make it the most valuable thing that we're trying to sell, because at the end of the day, you do want to solve the customer's problem, right? We do want to actually make sure that we're providing value. Rather than having a diet, a medium, and a great, right? Simply having one thing that solves all the problems, and then based on the customer's budget, we can decrease how they pay. All right, so hear me out. So let's say that we want to do this is a 6-month implementation of whatever kind of solution you sell. If you have a 6-month duration, you can have the person A, pay the entire thing up front. So that would be for somebody who has the highest budget. Version 2 would be a split pay. Version 3 might be 3 payments, right, at 20% higher. And then finally, you might have a 6 pay or whatever over that period of time. So 1, 2, 3, 6. Now, here's the cool thing. The more payment options you provide, the higher your conversions are. That's proven, all right? So the more options you give someone to pay, the more people will buy, period. Now, you might not make more cash flow, because if you give your sales guy more options, then they'll end up defaulting to the lower ones, right? But if you have one thing to sell, then they only have one thing to convince the person of, because a confused mind doesn't buy. If you have too many options, the salesman won't know what to sell and the prospect won't know what to buy. And so I prefer, when I'm coming into a portfolio company, I'm thinking, what is this true problem that we are solving with this business? For what avatar? And we make that the main thing, and we communicate it clearly in the scripting, and the salesperson has clarity on what they are selling, and they're always solving the same thing. And so the question becomes no longer which of these things are you going to buy, but once you are buying, how would you like to pay? And so then the discussion is around what payment plan is best for them rather than what product is best for them. And so by doing that, you can get people to go between different payment terms. That is not going to change whether they're going to buy. But if they're unsure about which product is going to best suit their needs, and the salesman doesn't know, because at the end of the day, he's just trying to sell the most expensive thing, then you'll have way more confused people who leave unsold. So this is a single tactic that you can use to execute within your business, which is why I'm a big fan of making offers people cannot say no to, is that you can focus all of your sales and all of your persuasion attempts on selling the one thing, which is getting them to say yes. Once they say yes, we can accommodate their wealth and their budget based on the payment terms that we provide. And if we have structured our offer properly, the offer in and of itself should already be very high gross margins, which means whether or not the person pays $1,000 a month or $100 a month, it's still almost all margin for us because of how we structure the thing that we are selling. And so we are able to capture higher LTVs by getting the people who have more money to prepay the thing up front. That is how we do it. And with those people, you'll be able to ascend into the second thing faster because they've already prepaid that thing. And then you can solve the next natural problem in another sales conversation rather than trying to pick all of the things in one conversation, which makes it incredibly difficult to do. This is, just for everyone, again, a broad brushstroke of statements for most entrepreneurs who are not very good at operating their businesses, who operations is not their strong suit, and are below $3 million a year.
Envy is having the desire for something that someone else has that you do not have. So you are lacking and someone else has something that you want and do not have. That is envy. Jealousy is when you have a threat that someone is going to take something that you have that they do not have. All right. And so, for example, I'll give you an example of each. So envy, I may be envious of a friend of mine. So I was actually talking to a good friend of mine who runs a big weight loss company. And right now he's doing better than I am. And now I am envious of his success. I am. I can feel it. I'm envious. I got off the phone and I was like, I am envious of you. Right. On the flip side, if someone comes to talk to Leila, right, it is the fact that they pose the threat of taking attention or her attention that I think should continuously belong to me that I would feel jealous over. I haven't felt jealousy in a long time, but that is an example. It could also be like with your kids. If you have some other adult in their life starts taking their attention or has more influence over them, you are jealous of the influence that person is threatening your influence over your child, right? So 2 examples, they're nuanced, but I think it's important. And when I was talking to Nick Barely about this, I was talking about how I think envy gets a bad rap. And I'm not going to go into the spiritual religious side of this or even the happiness side of this because I think envy absolutely does not make you happy. But I do think that envy will make you successful. All right. And so this is where I want to kind of dive into this. Envy is adaptive, right? As human beings, this is actually from our old brain, right? So this is animals have this too. They are envious of one another. And it's because if in a group, one person or one being, one animal, whatever, brings more to the table, you are now envious of that person. And what it does is it elevates the rest of the group to go and achieve the same, which is good for the collective. Not happier for each of the individuals, but as a pro-survival tool, right? And so for me, understanding this and at least being able to name the emotion rather than saying, I don't like this guy, or I'm angry at this person, or having this negative feeling that you cannot put words to, instead being able to say, I am envious has been very relieving for me because now I can actually tell those people, hey, I'm envious of you. And for some reason, I think it just creates another level of candor because it's a certain level of vulnerability and saying, you have something that I wish I had, but then you'll notice that the conversation is not defensive on that person's part. Most of the time they're like, well, let me help you. And it's only when we guise our intentions or try and feign, pretend to be a different way than we are, where people also can sense that you're being disingenuous. Like, great job, man, right? When realize deep down, and they can tell from your subtle tonality changes and the way you look that you're actually not happy for them, right? And so I think if you can at least say it, then it actually gives you power. Now, in terms of judging your motivations, because obviously you might think that envy is a bad motivation. It is my belief that I would rather deal with people who do good things for bad reasons than bad reasons for good things. Or I said the same thing twice, but they do the right thing for the wrong reasons rather than the wrong things for the right reason. All right, I'd rather someone who does the right outcome. And he gave me an example that was really powerful. He said a friend of his was a top Navy SEAL. And, one of the best Navy SEALs. He trains Navy SEALs, just a total badass, right? And before that, he was an EMT. And he talked about his experiences being an EMT is that most people think, EMTs have to be really caring. You want them to, they have to save these people's lives every day. And he said, the Navy SEAL was saying, I was not compassionate at all. I didn't really care that much about the person who was on the table in front of me. But what I did care about was my stats. I cared about the status of being the best. I wanted to have the fastest to the hospital. I wanted to have the highest survival rates, highest success rates of the people that were under my care because I cared about myself being the best. And so the question is, if you were the person who was on the table having a heart attack, would you rather have the compassionate EMT, or would you rather have the self-interested EMT who is doing it for status? Well, if it were me, I'd rather have the guy who wanted to pride himself on being the best in the world and didn't care about me at all, because I knew his result was going to be more pro me than the other person's. And so I think that as humans, as entrepreneurs, we judge ourselves a lot on our motivations and our intentions. But I think that if we can take a step back and name the emotion so that it's not this amorphous thing that we can't understand, but then take the next step and say, is this a pro-adaptive emotion? Is this something that's going to help me? Or is this an emotion that's going to drive me to do something that is negative? And I think at least even in naming that, we can increase the time between emotion and action. And the further that time gap is, in general, the better the quality of the decisions we make, because the more rational we are. We're never completely rational because we're emotion-driven beings and we have limbic systems that override things. But the more we can decrease the triggers, the emotional triggers that cause us to make bad decisions, ultimately the better decisions we make. And so I say all this to say, big picture, first, naming the emotions is important. Second, it creates space so we can make better decisions. Third, we can analyze those decisions and say, is this something that is going to help me in my life, or is this something that's going to hurt me? And then as a result of this, we don't have to judge ourselves as strongly on why we are doing things, and rather what is being done. Because candidly, I am a very envious individual, and maybe this is me just rationalizing my own negative, emotions. Who knows? But at least for me, saying it that way and framing the thought process in that way has helped me feel better about myself, and just less bad, if that's probably a better way of saying it, and not constantly berating myself for having desires that I think are wrong. And so Dan Sullivan said this, and I'll end with this, is that when people want something, if you want to make more money, if you want to have a bigger house, you want to have a bigger car, you want to build a podcast studio, whatever, right? He said, wanting is reason enough. Because so many times we ask, but why do we want that? We're probably not going to change the desire. And so letting ourselves desire things and giving ourselves permission to desire things, and myself specifically, has been incredibly freeing. And what it's done is given me a tremendous amount of my attention back that used to be allocated to analyzing why I'm feeling this way, or why this is right, or why this is wrong, and instead accepting the fact that I want something and that wanting it is okay, as long as it is not something that is hurting other people and that is not something that is hurting me.
I actually don't think about it much. I think a lot of people spend a lot of time and effort trying to figure out how they feel because they want to then judge or label themselves as I'm doing well or not well. Like a lot of effort goes into saying, like, how do I feel about this? I mean, my follow-up question would be like, why do you care? Why does it matter? And that's why when you asked way long ago about like, how much do you think feelings matter? I don't think they matter at all. Like, what would the case for feelings mattering be?
Then why do you believe they exist?
It's a good question. And it gets really interesting because it's like how I experience a feeling that I label in my head as sadness. Is it the same way you experience the thing that you, it's like seeing green and I see green and you see green. What if all of our greens are different, right? I mean, it gets very interesting like that. But I think that I experience something, and if we were to just measure it based on like brain activity and like heart rate, I would say that I become aroused in the literal sense from experiencing what I would deem as emotions. And so if we were to describe it or define the term in that way, I think I experience emotions. And so, I mean, I'm fairly confident I experience emotions. If we were to try and measure it that way, then that's how I would say, yes, I do experience them. But the question is just like, how important are they? And then it would be like, for what? If it's for accomplishment, not very important. For fitness, not very important. You know, if we're saying how important is emotion for love, which is another emotion, right? It becomes like amorphous trying to go to amorphous. But then you say, okay, well, if we're defining love by what I'm willing to endure to continue to keep something, then how important is it? Well, it depends on how much I've conditioned myself to accept this thing. So like if I want to stay married, it's probably far more effective to condition someone to stay married, because that is the external consequence of a good marriage as you stay together, right? I'm just saying, like, we're just purely measuring from external circumstances. And so I think trying to measure and define things is what I actually geek out on and I really enjoy. I think most people get bored to tears when I talk about this stuff, so I don't talk about it much. But that's the stuff that, like, when we keep peeling back layers of, like, why do you think you're able to get out of, you know, a difficult place in your life, or why do you think you were able to go through these things? A lot of it is because I believe that I will redefine terms. And so we'll have some instance or something that I should do, and I will redefine it, or I'll say I don't should. I can just accept it. And that's why the biggest refrain that I have in my head for, like, my own mental wellness is just like, and that's okay, period. Like, I don't want to go to that thing. That's okay.
I think that the whole ego death concept that we were talking about at the very beginning, I try not to talk about this too much because I think it's a lot of people take offense to it, and I don't mean it that way. I share this as just what worked for me and not as a criticism of anyone else's beliefs. For me, the idea that there was no such thing as legacy, that when I died, eventually everything that I had would become dust, and that anything expanded over a long enough time horizon disappears, right? Which, if you are like Christian, for example, it's the whole book of Ecclesiastes. And I think the realization of that allowed me to quiet my ego a lot, so that I could be more present in the idea that, like, this moment will only be here in my mind, and anything that I do here will not last. And so it shifted how I worked. It shifted how I saw relationships. And a lot of my thinking is around, like, my 85-year-old self. I feel like my number one mentor is, like, my fictitious 85-year-old self, because it's the only person that I really believe has my best interest at heart and has no ulterior motive. And so there's this tweet that I had that went pretty viral, but it was like, listening to a billionaire or a millionaire, I'll just use that. Like, when I was in my 20s, I wanted to be a millionaire. And when I was a millionaire, I wanted to be in my 20s. And so the idea that my future self would trade all the money he had to be poor in 20 again made me really reanalyze how I saw living life in the moment. If I literally in the future will value my present moment more than the achievement of the thing that I'm seeking right now in the present, then something's off. Because even my future self knows that. Because right now I would pay all the money I have to get 10 years back.
Isn't that
Not even
interesting?
thinking about it. And so then all of what I'm going to achieve in the next 10 years, I would happily give up to be right where I am right now. And so I think thinking about that really shifted a lot for me, because it helped me quiet, I'm not saying eliminate, but quiet some of the thoughts that are more ego driven. Because the ego always wants to, like, separate and isolate from others and prove that it's better. And if I know that it will all be dust, there is no better, because we're all going to be dust. And so in that same way, if we're all going to be dust and we're all siblings, like two very strong frames, for me at least, it helped me quiet that aspect. And I think in that way I was able, you can ask my people, but, like, I think I was able to show up better as a leader. I think I was able to show up better as a husband, show up better, like, to make content, things like that. Like, I don't think I could have made the stuff we make now 5 years ago, because I still think it would have been too
Proving something.
Yes,
right?
it was perfect.
Numbers, proving.
100% have been proving a fictitious foe wrong. Right. They're all talking about me. It's
Right. No one cares about you.
No, exactly. And so that was really, and it's like I had to shift from, like, no one cares about you to, like, I really want to have a shirt that says "No Lives Matter," but I feel like it would get way too.
No one cares about you.
But I think there's, like, a lot of, like, meat to that, where it's like, if we can, because in that way we are all equal, and so I think it's almost the most egalitarian perspective, is that, like, in the end we will all be dust. And so I think in that way that's, like, we have these exchanges that we have, and in some ways it makes it more beautiful.
When I started in this business, I took every single sale, and it was because I was so afraid that somebody would waste the opportunity. So if you have that fear, I understand where you're coming from. Second, when I had my first sale that was not me, I just had this emotional breakdown because I was like, oh my God, this could actually happen. And I promise you, if you haven't had it happen yet, you will when it does, because you realize that this business can actually work without you and other people can make it rain too, right? And then I'll tell you a quick story that illustrates the next point that I'm gonna make. So as I, hired some salespeople, now that first salesperson, were they exceptional? No, but they were able to get the job done. Later on, I had my first kind of like killer. And his name was Mario Negretti. And he came in, I don't know, a year into the business. And he so quickly was able to assume the sales role. And to show you how laughable this is, he started and I was about to start training him and some lady walked in the door and I was like, hey man, like I can take it. He's like, no, I'm good. He's like, go do your thing. He's like, fitness, nutrition, accountability. I'll figure it out. And he ended up closing this first lady who walked in the door for paid in full. And I remember walking in like completely dumbstruck. I was like, he didn't even know what the pitch was. But she walked out giggling, happy, so excited to start. And what that moment taught me was that it is good to train salespeople, but it's better to take great salespeople and then just point them in a direction. And so this has informed a lot of the thinking that I have around talent in general. And I'll tell you a couple of frameworks that have informed this. But like, if you look at Harvard doesn't produce the smartest people. They select the smartest people. And then they put smart professors in front of them. But like the base level of intelligence of everyone who's at Harvard is already exceptionally high. And so like, even if the teachers at Harvard were not exceptional, the students are, and they would be successful independent of that because their selection is so ridiculous, right? And so if we can think about our own companies that way, and especially if you're in the service business, like look at the biggest service companies out there. Like look at McKinsey, look at Bain, look at BCG, look at basically a lot of the finance world are service-based businesses a lot of times, right? And they're able to do that because they create such a pool to select from that they are able to skim for the best talent, right? I heard this quote from Esther Cathy, who's the founder of Chick-fil-A, you win the championship in the draft. And so it was such a belief that they had about picking the right people, even more so than training. And I would say that I have moved in that direction of a little bit more nature than nurture when it comes to roles, specifically sales especially. There are certain characteristics about building rapport, about having certain, dynamics or energy, whatever you want to say, that like Mario Negretti, when he walked in, he had all of these things and he didn't even know the pitch, but he won that sale off of just pure rapport. And so if I'm going to allocate the same level of time to training somebody, I might as well start with somebody who has a much higher base, because I could spend 10 hours to take someone from a 2 to a 4.5, or I could spend the same 10 hours taking someone from a 6 to a 9. And the thing is, I'm also going to get more bang for my buck in terms of my hours of training with somebody who has a natural proclivity for selling compared to somebody who does not. What's interesting about this, and this is just like my observation, is that you just have to be willing to talk to more people in the recruiting process. I will say, like from a recruiting standpoint, there's two kind of things to look out for. If you cannot pay super handsomely based on your price points, which you need to maybe fix later. But like, if you can't pay super well for the salesperson, then you need to look harder and you'll need to interview more people and you'll need to probably run ads and use your network. If you can pay well, the best salespeople are already employed. And so it comes down to recruiting those salespeople from other sales jobs, ideally from companies just like yours, so that they already know a lot of the things coming into it. So it decreases the ramp up time for them, because all we're really doing is swapping products, and the actual sales cycle, the type of sale, is it a transactional sale? Is it a long sale? Is it a software sale? Is it a coaching program sale? Whatever it is, right? There's so few variables that we're changing that they can immediately jump and go, which also allows you to make a judgment on their proficiency faster. And so as a quick side note to this, because this is something that I've given a lot of thought, if you look at the top salespeople and sales trainers, and this is going to drive home the point that I was making earlier about it being much of it being born, all right, is that if you look at the top people who are in the space, you look at Jordan Belfort, right? You look at Bradley, you look at, and some people would say me in terms from a selling perspective. All the guys that I know who have taught sales were exceptional salespeople day one. Brad Lee started selling cars when he was 18 years old and was the top salesman at 18 years old when he started. And he was like, I just found something I was really good at. Jordan Belfort talks about how he didn't know how to train anybody in his book. And then all of a sudden he, for the first time ever, wrote out a framework to explain the straight line sales system, which became his book and all that kind of stuff. But he, up to that point, it was just what he naturally did, right? And I can tell you in my instance as well, I'd already closed thousands of deals before I even consumed my first sales training. And so like, I do think that if we are selecting salespeople, I think it's much more about selection than it is about training. The training is to remind them how good they are, not necessarily to make them good. All right, and this is something that has shifted over time for me specifically. Now, if you're like, well, I suck at sales, you can absolutely put way more time into yourself than a business would reasonably put into an employee. All right, like you have you all the time. So you can train you in all your off hours and you're spending your own time to invest in yourself. But from a return on investment perspective, it's the cost of finding a good salesperson compared to the cost of training a bad or mediocre salesperson is significantly lower. It's much easier to find the right people than it is to take somebody and then make such a crazy extensive training, unless your entire model is we just take on every single person who walks in the door. Like 24 Hour Fitness has this model. They take on anybody who has a pulse and then they put them through a ridiculous culling process, and then 10% of people make it in the first 90 days. The number one thing I've struggled with my entire life is ego. And it's a topic that, I don't know, I feel like it gets talked a lot more in the woo-woo world than it does in like the entrepreneur world. But, you know, I think like ego kills profits. Pride kills profits. That's a much more quotable thing. So pride kills profits. And a lot of it is because like we care more about being right than serving the other person. And there's this quote about humility that, I can't remember the guy's name, but he's the guy who wrote, I think, Disruptive Innovation. He was a Harvard Business School professor. I think his first name's Christian. Anyways, very, very smart guy. And he said, humility is not thinking less of oneself, but increasing your regard for others. And that was a really useful definition for me because it's, you know, it's not about pushing yourself down. It's about raising everyone else up. And I think that there's been some podcasts that have gone really well. Like there's a School of Greatness podcast with Lewis Howes that I think is really, really good. That's going to come out soon. There's a podcast, the Iced Coffee Hour podcast with Graham Stephan and Jack Selby on their channel, which you can check out, is I think a really good podcast. Or at least I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from it. And I was trying to look at like, what's the difference between those ones and the ones that I come off, you know, douchier. And, you know, I'm partially exploring this out loud with you guys because like, I don't know if there's times where you're, you know, not coming off the way you want to, or you're like not in the right mood, or you're not the best version of you. You know what I mean? And I'm kind of making this because I think, you know, I feel like just from the comments and the posts and the tags and things like that, like Mozi Nation, and I love you guys to death. I think there are some times where you put me on a pedestal, like I am something that I am not. You know what I mean? Like I am very flawed, and I work at it. You know what I mean? And I fail a lot. And ego has been one that I've struggled a lot with, and it was the thing that really isolated me, you know, when I was younger. Because I definitely, you know, and I think ego is another way of saying insecurity, of just, you know, wanting to prove that you're better than people because deep down you don't feel like you're good enough. And so for me, that's been a struggle my entire life. And it's been just I see it much more as a war than I do a battle. You know what I mean? So, you know, wars have many, many battles in them. And at this point, I'm definitely not undefeated. So it's much more about like, I'd like to have more W's than L's in the wins and losses column around this. And I think I've just had a lot of L's lately. And so I'll just explain to you what I think, you know, my process of what I'm going to try and think of around this, you know, in the future is that I'm going to try and level set before I get on interviews. And so I put a little checklist in my phone of like, hey, humility is increasing your regard for others. It's caring more about the audience. It's caring more about the other person than being right. And it's ideally just lifting up everyone around you. And it's just, you know, I think there's just this part of me that always screams out and wants to, you know, prove something. And I'm sure that, you know, a lot of the material success has come from this place. And I don't think it's a positive place. I think it's a negative one. Or rather it's a, you know, an emotion that I wouldn't say is a pull. It's when I say positive, negative, I should redefine it as it is an away from fuel rather than a towards fuel. Like most of my motivation has been trying not to feel like a failure in my own eyes than it is to, you know, pull towards something. I'd like to, when I operate in my best self, I think I have more pull motivation, but I still think that there's a significant part of me that is driven away from things and driven away from pain.
I say this because all of us, right? I do this all the time, right? And this is going to be a repeated theme because it needs to be repeated, right? We need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. That is a saying that we have in my world, and I will pass it on to you guys, Mozi Nation. We need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. Do the boring work, repeat successful actions. And so if he's gotten to this point, or if you've gotten to a point in your business and it has plateaued, the question is, has it plateaued because this is true? Like the only reason a business should plateau that is reasonable, that is not your fault, is that you have reached the total addressable market, as in you have saturated the total market of that thing. So for example, if you were selling dog food and every dog within this, maybe you sell a specific type of niche of poodle food, right? You've gotten, 70% of poodle owners to buy your food, and you can't grow any more beyond that, right? Well, that would be reasonable, but then you'd obviously just do a different type of dog, right? You'd hop verticals, right? So there's not even a reason, but it would be the only potentially rational reason would be that your market has changed. So a different example is a friend of mine owns a company that does newspaper advertising. All right, so they actually help newspapers translate their advertisements into digital products, which is pretty cool. So they are able to sell basically a whole new ad product to small businesses who want to buy ads, right? Which is, by the way, how newspapers make money. He could not grow his business because newspapers have shrunk by 25% year over year, which is 25% compounding the wrong direction. And he's been in that business for like 10 years. So now the market size is literally 5% of what it used to be 10 years ago. And so as a result of that, he was growing at an inverse rate to the shrinkage of the industry, right? And so he got to a point where he couldn't grow any more than just basically servicing the ones that are still alive. And then as they fell, so did his business, right? And so that is the only logical reason that a business can plateau that is not in your control. And unless you're selling to newspapers, which you're probably not, the reason is much simpler, which is you just don't know how. And I'll tell you a different story that I had, and then I'll wrap this up at the end. So I was having a different conversation with a woman who was doing, I think, $4 million a year. And she was selling info products that were weight loss. So weight loss info products. So programs and ebooks and things like that, which is cool, right? She has a big following, all that kind of stuff. And I did a podcast with her, and after we got off the podcast, she was like, yeah, so these are my plans. I'm going to be doing an apparel line and a supplement line and a cream line and a whatever, right? And I just kind of sat there and I was like, well, I think it's a terrible idea. She just looked at me across there. She's like, what? And I was like, yeah, I think it's a terrible idea. And she was like, oh. And I was like, why don't you just take the thing that's making you $4 million and make you $10 million? Why don't you do that? And the answer is the same as the first answer. I just don't know how. And I was like, right, well, why don't we solve that problem and then not create a new business? Why don't we just put all of our effort into solving that problem? And so I'm a big believer, and this is the piece that I want to share with you, Mozi Nation, is that I'm a big believer in the theory of constraints, which means that a system will grow until it is constrained, right? It has a constraint, and then once you remove the constraint, it will continue to grow, right, until it reaches another constraint. And so most people are always curious, or many people ask me, hey, Alex, how did you achieve, quote, so much in, quote, such little time or at such a young age? And I say all that in quotes because so much could be in young age, whatever. But I'm paraphrasing, all right? And I think that one of the things that we have done well is prioritizing what problems to solve. And that is understanding the prioritization of problems and realizing that there is really only typically one or two things that are constraining our growth. And by definition, there'd really only be one thing that's the constraint until we reach another thing that might be beginning to constrain us, but isn't the true constraint yet. Mortality has been the single biggest driver and the biggest decisions that I've made in my life, and it has become a more routine process for decision making for me in general, because I think it provides clarity and it provides context to most of the decisions we have, which the vast majority of them don't matter, which is helpful in and of themselves. And then, beyond that, it helps me make the decisions that I think removes everyone else from the playbook, because if you study subjective well-being and how people perceive how they're doing in their own lives, it looks like a smiley face. So 7-year-olds think they're killing life. And then it drops dramatically between 20 and 30.
And then there's still a little bit more of a dip right around 45. That's like when people are at their true, they hate life the most. and then it kind of slowly goes up until like 55, 60, and then it shoots right back up again when people see that they're going to die and that life is short and that they can make the decisions without worrying about the ramifications of other people. And some of the people they're worried about are also dead. And so it was using that context for that biggest decision that's been duplicated many times in my life since then, because if I have a good decision-making algorithm, I try and reuse it as many times as I can. There was a tweet by Leila, my wife. She said, like, stop listening to people about how to play the game who've never been anywhere but the sidelines. And the problem is, too many of the people who are watching this right now, y'all are on the sidelines and have always been on the sidelines and are trying to pick a niche to get into to sell how to do the niche. Well, that's dumb. You've never done it. So a lot of times people are trying to skip to a higher leverage opportunity without having done the requisite work of understanding the niche, which is why the Y Combinator people look for, like, if you want to make a software in the payment space, we'd love to see that you have experience in the payment space, because there's so much stuff that you don't know that you know when you actually spend 3-5 years doing something in an industry. You understand the lingo, you understand the avatar, you understand the problems, and you can see opportunities if you have an entrepreneurial hat on. There's always problems in every industry, which means there's always opportunity. And fundamentally, business is just solving problems that exist and making sure the math makes sense. Like, that's literally it. It's like, where is there a problem? How much do they think this is a problem? And is there a way that I can solve it and charge for it? That's it. Like, that's really all that business is. And really, how well you solve the problem is going to dictate how much virality your business has, because if you solve it really well, people will tell people and your business will grow, right? I think the problem that a lot of people have is they didn't know how to make an offer, right? Is the fundamental thing that is the beginning of building a business, is you got to know what you're selling. And so that was a problem for a lot of people. And then people got that problem solved, and then they told their friends, and the book sold 100,000 copies in 6 months with no promotion. And so I'm sharing this because I couldn't write a book on offers without having made a ton of offers. And I feel like there's too often people who are trying to focus on a niche who've never actually done the thing in the niche. And this is really, really rampant in the internet space, because everyone's trying to take a shortcut to get there when they realize, like, when I'm telling you right now, you're never going to get there because you're not good enough. Like, you're never going to get there because you're not good enough. You have to do the rocky cutscene. You have to eat the for a period of time so that you can get the reps in, so you can put your time under the bar in, so that you can actually get good. And before you are good, you will suck. And you have to accept a long period of sucking, and you do enough volume that eventually you'll suck so little that you'll actually be good. And then at that point, then you'll actually have a real decision to make, which is, I'm actually really good at this thing now that I've learned. Do I want to teach it to other people, or just want to do more of the thing that I'm doing, right? Because like a realtor can then just grow a team of 100 realtors and own the entire thing, which is what I'd recommend this guy do, right? Rather than have an agency that does it, right? And so this is kind of where I think the problem is that, like, I had another question that was sent to me on Instagram, which is like, hey, how do I solve churn? Because a lot of my clients aren't getting results. And I'm like, well, duh. He's like, he said, how do I scale from 10,000 to 100,000 a month when I don't have a lot of testimonials? I was like, you're not good at the thing that you're supposed to be good at. It's why you don't have testimonials. It's why you're not going to $100,000 a month. Like, he's making the goal $100,000 a month rather than being good. I have no words. I don't get it. You know what I mean? Like, everyone's in such a rush that you will never get there. It is the slowest path to getting there, is to fool yourself into thinking that you're good at something that you're not. You have to go and pull the thread and say and the thing is like, well, do what you're passionate about. Whatever. You're not going to be passionate about stuff that you suck at. What you have to do is like, which of these opportunities seem like they potentially have high leverage, and I'm going to learn from the bottom, right? It's like one of the best ways to learn stuff is starting at the bottom, not because it's the only option, but because if you understand the entire pathway of a client journey or of an industry journey, then you will have more trench knowledge, more depth of experience that you will be then able to apply. People see my, videos on personal finance. People see videos of mine on sales. People see videos on mine recruiting. People see videos of mine of marketing. And it's like, how did you acquire all these skills? It's because it's not like because I tried to jump to the spot that I'm at. You can't skip. Like, there's a sequence. Buildings are built with foundations, and your career is a pyramid, and the peak of that pyramid is based on the depth of the foundation that you build. And so, like, I've said this before and I'll say it again, but your work works on you more than you work on it. And so even though you might not be getting paid in the period that you're at, just because you're struggling doesn't mean you're failing. And the thing is, as long as you're getting better, you're making progress, and the progress is the success, is that you are getting better. And like, you will turn the corner. Like, that's an inevitability if you put enough time in.
One of the things that I've seen across the board when we're talking to entrepreneurs and, the gym owner community that we have, is that the one trait I see over and over again that is clear to the people who are winners, right? The top 1%. I'm not talking top 10%, but the top 1%. Is the speed with which they execute after making a decision. One of the definitions that, like, we talk about in the community is that The definition of power, as I understand it, is the gap between thoughts becoming reality. And so if you thought about an omnipotent being, right, someone who has unlimited power, as they think, that thing would be, right? And so if you were to believe in a creator of some sort, then you might think, as that creator thought, the universe became, right? And so if you think that as like the ultimate scale of power, then the closer we can get to that, the more powerful we become, the more potent we are as entrepreneurs. And so I see this so many times that it's not even oh, like this is associated with success. Like this is what creates success, because the gap between where you decide something is a good idea and when it actually occurs is the loop with which you can improve your business. And so it's a lot like, I can't remember what the saying was, but it's not like how old the car is, but about how many miles are on it. And what I mean by that is like, we're young, right? But there's been a lot of iterations that have happened from, when the business first started, when I started my first gym until now. And I think the key to that is the speed of the OODA loop. And that's just like a military term, like observe, orient, decide, act. And it's just the loop with which that you can basically see what's going on, make a decision, act on it, and then do that whole loop again, right? Because the faster you can pivot and iterate, the more responsive you are as an entrepreneur, the faster you can take advantage of opportunities, the faster you can find out what failures are, and then move on. I want to talk about this within the context of running a team and employees, and then also within yourself. And so from running your team, right, one of the things that, once you're moving out of you doing things all the time, there's how do I get other people to do things? And so that's why I called this like of week, right? Is that one of my biggest pet peeves is like, yeah, I can get you that by end of week. I'm like, why don't you just get it to me in an hour? Because that's how long it takes. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, I have a meeting right then. It's like, is it more important than this? No. Okay, well then do it. Like if you think about how you can run an organization like that, if you can get things done end of day, right, rather than end of week, you are literally speeding up the organization 7x. Think about that. And so when you're thinking about deadlines and you're thinking about expectations, you as the owner can set the cadence. If people say, hey, can we do this? And then you're like, cool, let's start right now. You set the tone for how the organization is going to move, how quickly it's going to orient, how quickly thoughts become reality, and ultimately how powerful your organization will become because of the speed, right? And speed isn't doing things fast. It's basically just not being distracted by other shit that doesn't matter. It's being able to prioritize. And most people, a lot of the times, aren't doing something that's high priority, right? A lot of times they're just doing nothing. If you can speed up that loop and force and apply pressure to your team to not do things by end of week or even end of day, it's like, it's 10 a.m. Can you get this done by noon? Okay. And then you can have that loop happen 3 times within a day rather than it taking 3 weeks, right? Because you've set that cadence from the beginning and then things get done faster. So I've been reading some really interesting books lately and I referred them out to a handful of entrepreneur friends that I have that are all doing 5 to 15 million, kind of in that range. And what was amazing to me is that every single one of them read the book immediately, sent me back their notes and what they were going to do with it. And basically were asking feedback on the angle that they were going to take with it. What's fascinating to me is that if you look at lower level entrepreneurs, and I'm not saying that in a negative way, I'm just saying in terms of just objective revenue, like just they haven't achieved as much. The delay between being able to gain information and act is so much longer, and that's why where they want to be. It's kind of the same degree of people who pay for our program and haven't gone through the portal yet. I'm like, what are you doing, right? Like what priority, like what education do you have that is not relevant to your business? Like you're reading a motivational blog right now when you have to translate that motivation into a thought that you're then going to quote test, and then you have to see how that test works, and then maybe it improves something, rather than just following the playbook that has already been tested and has already, like the tree has been shook, right? And so if you look at like Joey, for example, who by all definitions, his gym is the number one gym within Gym Launch, right? He had already finished everything in Legacy by week 8, his first 8 weeks. He'd already implemented every single system in Legacy. And so it's not like he has more hours in the day, right? It's not like his business is different. It's just that his level of efficacy in execution was so high because he didn't allow himself to get distracted by things. And the moment he has something he needs to execute, it creates this itch inside of him that he can't move forward without executing this so that the relief comes. And if you can start to foster that type of behavior in yourself and those attitudes about execution, you will grow faster and you will become more powerful as an entrepreneur, right? If you think about your competition, who would you fear, right? The competitor who sees what you're doing can immediately execute, implement, and improve on it at a faster loop than you can even understand what's going on, right? And that's where speed of first to market and things like that don't matter as much, because if a competitor can execute and out OODA loop, right, can speed that loop up faster, they can iterate and improve on it faster than you can, and then you have no chance to catch up. And so if you're looking at your business, look at it from a context of speed, of how long does it take us to improve things? How long from understanding that our churn is high to executing the 5 horsemen, how long did that take? We knew what the problem was. How long did it take for us to do? And if you can get real with yourself about how many actual hours it will take to do something, and then you look at your week and you think, okay, what am I doing today that is more important than this? And where can I put these 2 hours? And start with the moment that you make the decision. And then all of a sudden you'll be getting things done that day, that afternoon, rather than end of week, end of month. We purposely delay these things because we just procrastinate for no reason when the problem will not go away, right? And so that is why within Gym Launch, speed is king is one of the core tenets of the business, because you have to, and the tone has to start with you as the entrepreneur. Like, you have to apply that pressure. You have to say end of week. Why, like, what are you doing today that's more important than this, right? What are you doing in the next 2 hours that's more important than this? Tell me. Right? And a lot of times you'll get the answer like, well, I guess I can do it now. It's like, yeah, then let's do it now. Let's get it done. Right? And that small change can 7x, right? If you even going from end of week to end of day, can 7x how quickly your business grows, because the solutions that you need to implement to solve the problems and break through the bottlenecks happen today, not in a week, not in a month. And then the reaction to the next thing that breaks, the next bottleneck in the business, happens not in a week, not in a month, but in a day. And then that's how quickly you can pivot from where you are to where you want to go, because it's not one big thing. It's a million small turns that will get you there.
A lot of people, I would say, mistakenly think that the number one resource is time, right? Everyone's like, time is money, time is money, time is money. And I would argue that that's not necessarily true. I would argue that attention is money. That is the golden resource. So the billionaire friend that I have, he's actually been helping me on the new endeavor that we are launching to our gym lords soon, which I think will change the industry. Anyways, he's been helping me with that stuff. But like, here's an example. On his phone does not ring unless you are already a contact that has been whitelisted. His phone doesn't ring. He's impossible to reach. The more successful, the larger your company grows, the more you scale, the more you need to scale. And the only way to scale you is because you do have a finite amount of attention. And so what happens is you have to decrease all of the other things in your life that drain attention, because you can have as much time as you want, but if you're not there, you're not potent, you're not able, then you can't get anything done with that time that you're supposedly allocating, which is why a lot of people end up in this in-between state of always everywhere and at the same time nowhere, right? And so they're everywhere, but they're not paying attention to anything. And the reason that it's difficult to focus is because entrepreneurs, the character trait that made us into entrepreneurs is that we're go-getters, we're risk averse, we're creators, we're innovators, we're builders, right? We have all of those traits. But the difficulty is that the thing that gets you from 0 to 1 is not the thing that gets you from 1 to 2, right? And so the reason that you have to totally morph and why you have to be a growth-oriented individual is because you have to change your own individual character traits in order to progress as a business owner. And so, like I said, the things that got you here are not the things that are going to get you there. The things that got you here, which is your own internal skills, are not the things that you need to pass on to other people. So the only way that you were able to grow your business at a certain point is by growing other people, right? And the only way you can do that is if you have the attention and the bandwidth in order to do so. And that's why if you look at a business owner, and like the more I obsess on looking at billionaires and people who are doing better than we are, is I look at how quiet and how clean they keep their space. And I mean that both in a literal sense, that like their surroundings, their office, their house, their homes, their cell phone, their computers, right? It's quiet, right? Everything, like it's pristine. And when you talk to these people, there's a certain amount of tranquility that's there, and they just have very low tolerance. And it's not that they're trying to be impatient with you or impatient with the world. It's just that they understand that they have they're operating at such a high level that there's so many things that are demanding of their time and attention that they just they can't. And so they have to forcibly remove themselves from so many different situations. And I'm going to give you an example. So one of the people that I'm somewhat mentoring, right? They had 4 businesses, and this is something that happens so many times. Like you want $100,000 coaching. This is what happens in $100,000 coaching sessions. And I'm being honest with you. What happens is someone who's coming in, usually doing between $1 and $3 million a year, can't get past a certain point, right? And the reason they can't get past is because they only have so much attention, and they have it spread between 4 or 5 different cakes. That's when the gym owner has 4 gyms and is making less money than they did when they had 1 gym, because the amount of attention that they can allocate to one facility has gone down so much that with fixed costs, they basically are breaking even, right? And so the same thing happens. Now that entrepreneur is probably making $1 to $3 million in gross revenue, but not taking anything home because they don't have the attention to actually put onto things. And so in order to grow, you need to do less. In order to grow, you need to do less. And that comes from both delegation and also choosing what not to do. The better you get, the better the opportunities that you have to say no to. Imagine the level of opportunities that we have now. I'm just being honest. So imagine how many things we could do or try and JV with or do a partnership with or whatever because of the distribution network that we have and the trust and the goodwill that we have with the gym owners that we have in our network, right? A lot. You know how many people cold message me like, I have an opportunity for you. I'm like, really? You have an opportunity for me. And so the better you get, the better your opportunities you have to say no to, which is why becoming a higher and higher and higher level entrepreneur is more and more difficult because it requires discipline. It's not about doing more, it's about doing less because we innately want to do more. So doing more of your own internal characteristic, if that was what it took to be more successful, then everyone would be more successful because it would be something that does not take effort because that is something that we already do. It's like, man, I outwork anyone. I've got all this work ethic. Cool. That gets you from 0 to 1. It's not going to get you any further than that. So stop identifying with that. It was something that I used to identify with. I was like, I'll outwork anyone, whatever. Like that was something that I used to think about. And it was a character trait. It was an identity thing. And the more you grow, the more you realize that your identity needs to be fluid because what it needs to be is exactly what it needs to be at that given time of development. Because the character traits that I'm going to have to emphasize in a year are going to be different than the ones that I have to emphasize now. The skills that you need to learn, like delegation, leadership, those are things that are not the things that take you in the beginning. You have to be independent. You have to be hustling. You have to be grinding. You have to be willing to put in the work because no one else will do it for you, especially if you have no capital to start, which most of the people who are on here are in that situation. To reel this back in, the number one thing that you have to be paying attention to is where you are paying your attention, right? Like you spend attention. That's why they call it paying attention. It's because it is a resource. And most people don't pay attention to that, right? And so one of the things that a lot of people don't know about me, this one's going to go long. Some of the things that a lot of people don't know about me is that I, for 9 months, paid a coach to teach me one thing, which was to manage my attention, was to teach me how to think. And so for 90 minutes every single day, all I did was talk about what I was thinking about. Think about that. Every day, I paid attention to where my attention was. And when I did that, all of a sudden, my business blew up, right? And I realized that I had toxic relationships. I had toxic relationships with parents. I had toxic relationships with friends or pseudo-friends, things that were taking my attention, past things that I had on my mind that I knew I had not handled. So those are called like open loops or open cycles, right? So when you have something that you like, I haven't resolved this, then you need to handle that and you'll get that attention back because what happens is you have this bowl, this tiny little bowl of marbles, and each of those marbles is a unit of attention, right? If you had to measure it. And so you put little marbles of attention on your childhood traumas. You put little marbles of attention on your marriage. You put little marbles of attention on your health. You put little marbles of attention on your spirituality, and then massive marbles of attention on your business. But the thing is that sometimes you need to quiet and collect all of these other little marbles so that you have more potency, more potential energy, more potential units of attention to spend on the one thing that you're trying to grow, which in this case would be your business. And what's interesting is that what happens is that things that were perceived as difficult become really easy. And I don't know if you've ever had this happen, but like if you were in college or you were in high school and you were like, man, I can't solve this problem, this math problem, and you were exhausted, and then you go to bed and then you wake up the next morning, and then all of a sudden it seems really easy. Or you're like, I don't know why I didn't see that before. Because attention gives you the ability to see. right? Like if you think about wisdom, right? Wisdom is an ability to see what other people cannot see, right? Two people are presented the same situation. The wiser person sees things that the other person doesn't. And how can you see better? You see better if you have more ability to see, which comes from your most valuable resource, attention. How much horsepower do you have? And so look at the things that you have in your life right now. Like if I see someone who has a messy relationship life, who's got a messy love life, who goes out every weekend and gets trashed, right? Like I can tell you, billionaires don't do that. That like the whole Tony Stark like vision of the entrepreneur is a farce. It's not true. Don't believe that. Every single billionaire, every single high-level entrepreneur is quiet, unbelievably quiet. They keep themselves completely isolated. They have a bubble around them of layers of protection. They're like for me, it's me, and then there's Leila, and then we have our COO, and then we have our executive assistant team, because we have a team of EAs at this point. We have 4 who work the next level. There's no one who has direct access to me, including our employees. No one does. And that's because it would disserve you guys, our gym owners, if everyone had access to me. The reason that I don't respond to Facebook messages is not because I don't want to. It's because I literally can't. And if I did, I would be disserving everyone, because then my attention would be split, because someone can't generate leads in their market or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, because these little things that are perceived as huge issues to you in that moment, because you have a little bit of attention, you have so little left that everything seems like an explosion. But when you have lots of capacity, big problems seem small, and small problems seem big. And it sounds reverse, because what you do is you start seeing that all of these things are attention drains, and you just say, I don't want to play anymore. And you stop playing.
Because you made it this far in a video, I want to celebrate you. Most people start and don't finish. Most people never actually follow through. Most people say they want something, but they don't ever do the work to actually get it. But you are different. You are special. Believe Nation, you made it here all the way to the end, and I love you. So as a special celebration, if you put a hashtag believe down in the comments below on this video, I will showcase you and celebrate you somewhere on the screen in a future video, because you are awesome.
For 10 more amazing rules from Grant Cardone, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
I told my wife when I got with her, I said, look, I'll do anything for you except one thing. I will not give up on my dream. If I got to surrender my dream, I'd rather be alone. Because if I abandon my dream, I'll abandon you. I truly believe that. I see so many people, man, they give up their dream for the wife.